Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. We'll just start with introductions of the members here today. So I'm Matt White and I chair this committee, although I will be chairing most of the meeting tonight. That falls to the Vice Chair on my right.
Hi, Councillor Pippa Connor. I'm the Vice Chair of OSC and chair the Adults and Health Scrutiny Committee.
And to my left.
Hi, Macbula Guinness, Councillor for South Tottenham Ward. I'm also the chair of Children and Young People's Panel.
Hi, I'm Alex Worrell. I chair the Housing Scrutiny Panel.
Good evening. I'm Yvonne Denny and I'm the representative for the London Diocesan Board.
Thanks. And Lords is online. Lords, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Lourdes Kiva. I'm a co-opted member and represent the Diocese of Westminster.
Thank you. And we've got a number of officers and cabinet members here tonight, so we'll let them introduce themselves when they come in to speak. So item 1 on the agenda is filming at meetings. If people could just note the information provided on the front of the agenda about the meeting being filmed and recorded. Second item is apologies for absence. I don't believe we've got any apologies for absence, although I've received apologies for lateness from Councillor Simmons-Sappho. Item 3, urgent business. I don't believe there's any items of urgent business. Item 4, declarations of interest. Do any members of the committee have any declarations of interest they wish to make at this point? No, thank you very much. And item 5, deputations, petitions, presentations, questions. I don't believe we have any of those this evening. Moving swiftly on. Minutes of our last meeting, was it, on pages 1 to 10? Before we agree those, does anyone have anything that they wish to raise under this item about those minutes? No. Are we happy to agree the minutes as provided in the papers as an accurate record of the meeting? Agreed. Thank you very much. And item 7, minutes of scrutiny panel meetings. So these are not the most recent scrutiny panel meetings, I don't think, but the ones prior to that. There's one for each panel. This is for us to note and receive. Does anyone have anything in particular they wish to raise from the meetings of their panels? Anything that they want to bring to the attention of cabinet? Anything like that? Nothing. Okay. Right. I'm now going to hand over to Councillor Connor, the Vice Chair, to chair item 8, scrutiny of the our part of this budget.
Good evening and thank you, Chair, and thank you everyone for coming this evening. It's really appreciated that you've all come, especially the cabinet members. I know you're all very busy, so thank you for attending this evening. So agenda item 8 is actually I think there's a bit of feedback on this, but anyway, scrutiny of it says we've got a scrutiny of the 2024-25 draft budget and the 5-year medium-term financial strategy. This is actually related to all the other areas of the council that we haven't yet scrutinised through the panels. So this is the bit where we sort of look at and we wrap up all the areas that we haven't actually done, including culture, strategy and engagement and part of the environment and resident experience. We also look at corporate, legal and governance. We look at finance. So there's a number of smaller areas that we'll go through as we go through the meeting this evening. Just for clarity, so that people, if they're following online, are able to follow if they've got the papers in front of them. Although the agenda item starting at page 45, the panel specific information is starting at page 51. So I'll go now to Francis to introduce this item and just give us a quick roundup of the sort of the main area and the panel specific information. And then once the members have gone through this area, we'll then be going on to the appendices, which are found at the back of your pack. And I think that's probably page 1, 2, 3 in the main pack. So we'll be looking at the appendices and we'll be going through those in turn as we go through. So I'm going to hand over now to Francis to open this part of the meeting with the officer's report and just give us a little bit of information, an overview, as they say, of what's happening. Thank you.
So good evening. Francis Palopoli, Head of Finance. So just a very brief overview of Section 5 of your covering report. It sets out the background really to the draft budget and MTFS that was presented to Cabinet on the 5th of December. I'm just going to pick out a few key points to note. So you'll have read that it's been a very challenging financial planning process this year, not just for Haringey, but for the public local authority sector as a whole. We've been seeing pressures from inflation, underlying inflation this year. Earlier this year was sort of 10%. It's dropping now, but that's still having impacts on us. Bank of England interest rates are high, and the cost of living, those pressures are putting pressures on the cost of living, and also increasing the costs of many of our contracts and sort of providers providing key services to the council. Our financial planning process has recognised those pressures, and in fact, just for the demand-led areas, we've actually built in 25.5 million growth for next year. Despite all that focus work leading up to December the 5th Cabinet, there's still a gap of 16.3, although that report did make very clear that between the publication of that report and the final report at the beginning of February, additional proposals would be looked for and put forward to ensure that we can meet our statutory obligation to set a balanced budget. That was largely focusing on the general fund position, but clearly the economic environment has had significant impacts on capital and the HRA as well. And strategies have been looked at across both of those areas as well to try and mitigate the economic impacts there. So that was a sort of broad introduction to the overall draft budget. If I can take members to section 6, the panel specific material, I thought it'd be useful if I talk through the first section, which is on and where I am, 6.1 on page 51. And this section is just providing a bit of background for the committee in terms of the in-year financial position for the services that we're looking at tonight. So it's important for you to understand where they are now, because that provides the context for the decisions that are being proposed for next year. So at Q2, and that was in the Cabinet report in December, these services collectively were forecasting an overspend of 3.6 million in this financial year. Be fair to say that the lion's share of that was within the corporate budget areas, so not the service specific areas, but the corporate areas, 2.7 million. And that is predominantly due to the impact of inflation rates and the Bank of England interest rates. So we're forecasting that we're going to be spending more than we've budgeted for in terms of paying interest, but we're equally going to get some offsetting improvements on income that we get when we invest money. We have spare cash that we invest overnight, so we get better returns. The net impact of that is still an overspend of 2.7 at Q2. Things do move, and that may not be where we land at the end of the year, but that was the position at Q2. I'll just quickly run through the other service areas and the Q2 position. So legal and governance, forecasting around £500,000 overspend. A significant part of that is within corporate legal services, where there's been real ongoing challenges for them in recruiting permanent staff. It's a competitive market. You'll see here that they've been out and did quite a significant campaign. I think 10 to 12 vacancies, struggled, had very limited success. They are planning to go out again, but obviously we pay a premium for having locums and interims in, so that's driving some of that cost. The coroner's service, again, there's some additional cost there. We've got a new area, coroner's post. Pathology costs have been increasing, and the cost of body removal have also gone up, and that one is an ongoing pressure, and we are actually building in some new growth. We've recognised that won't go away, and we've built in growth for next year. Registrars, a smaller pressure. They're just failing to meet their income targets this year. Corporate finance, an overspend, again, the same reasons for corporate legal. We are carrying a number of vacancies and are having to pay more for interims. That's what's driving that. Digital services, a smaller overspend, largely pressures against some contract related budgets. Some of that pressure is being addressed in next year's budget, where we've put in quite a considerable growth assumption in digital services. HR, about 100k over, and that is just a one-off. It's not a recurring pressure. It's a timing issue there. Customer and corporate services, a small underspend, largely around staffing costs. Parks and leisure, again, it's I understand this is a one-off, largely a one-off pressure. Some business rates that should have been picked up last year are falling into the current financial year. So again, that's not a recurring overspend, with some minor salary pressures as well. And community safety, waste and enforcement, 550k overspend forecast. Underspend, sorry. They've done quite a lot of work, I think, in the light of overspends in other parts of the directorate and the council overall, to look to identify savings and where they can look to postpone spend. So that's an overall summary of the in-year position. I don't know whether it's worth stopping there before we then move on to the appendices, Councillor Connor.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you very much. So as the panel, we're now going to start on, as I said, on section 6. We're going to go through this area and a couple of items on the table before we go to the appendices. So I'm going to take questions now. Councillor White, first your hand raised, and then are there any other hands at the moment? Councillor Worrell afterwards.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Francis. So just having a look at the overspend, we're looking in the area that we're looking at tonight. We're looking at a £3.6 million overspend, of which more than 50%, £2 million, is constituted by changes in interest rates. That's made up of £5.6 million overspend in interest rates and 3.8 million mitigation from our increased income from our investments, leading to £2 million overspend overall. But that does, despite the mitigation, that makes up more than half of the overspend in this area. I just would like a better understanding of how that works, really, given a training that this body very recently had. We were told that increases in interest rates don't have, my understanding was anyway, they don't have that great an effect, because most of our investments are made at fixed rate interest. So changes in interest rates shouldn't have that huge an effect. So I just like to have a kind of fuller understanding of how changes in interest rates that are happening now affect our interest payments if most of our, you know, existing borrowing is at fixed rates when it was borrowed.
Councillor Carlin, yes.
Sorry, if I could just come in on that. I think what we have to understand is the scope of our actual borrowing. I don't have the exact figures, but but it is extensive, and so even so a 5 million a 5 million overspend in terms of the extent of our borrowing, which I assume would be the loans that are coming up and then we have to reborrow, or loans that we made more recently to borrow, costing that us that amount extra. 5.6 million is not a huge amount. At the moment, if we have to borrow, it's costing us 7%, which means that if we borrow 100 million, and we're talking about a borrow, you know, in terms of our total borrowing, we borrow 100 million, that costs us £7 million a year. So the 5.6 million amount, that's why the paper actually says that even small changes have quite big effects, and that's because of the size of the borrowing that we have. So in terms of the amount of money that we borrowed, so 100 million would be £7 million. So we're not talking huge amounts. But France will come in on more specifics on that. But that's why, and the investment that we have, again, 3.8 million. That's about 50 million would be about 3.8 million in terms of additional, in terms of our investments, because we're looking at large sums of money. So these are not huge sums of money in terms of the extent of our borrowing. But Francis, if you could come in, or John, on a little bit more detail.
Yeah, I think Councillor Carlin has covered off most of it. It's also fair to say that this was the position at Q2. I mean, it does, the actual position at outturn will depend on the extent of the capital programme, what actually gets spent this year, because obviously we forecast, we put something in the capital programme on the assumption that things will happen. As we know historically, and it's just a matter of course, and often a lot of these large projects, they don't always follow the expected profile of spend for whatever reason. So the position here is the prudent forecast, as it says in the Q2 report, that we're hoping actually that before we get to year end, that may change, but it will depend on the actual spend that we see on the capital programme. So that may not be the final position.
Thanks for that. So just so I'm completely clear, the £5.6 million figure, what we're talking about here is refinancing and new borrowing at higher rates than we were expecting, rather than we're paying more interest on existing borrowing that was made in previous years.
Yeah, I think that would be fair to say. I mean, we do always look at the existing amounts that we've got invested or we've borrowed and looking for opportunities, but that's set out fairly clearly in the TMSS that you've just had some training on as well. So it shouldn't fluctuate too much.
Okay, thank you. And just to say, Councillor Cullen, would you just like to introduce yourself? So in case anyone's listening online, they know who you are.
Sorry, I'm Councillor Dana Carlin, and I'm the Cabinet Member for Finance and Corporate Services. Thank you.
Thank you. They probably guessed, but just in case. Okay, thank you. I've got Lords with her hand up. Lords, would you like to come in and ask a question?
It is something that I've been aware of for some time, because I go to a lot of meetings, including those run by Health, where the issue of agency staff and our dependency as a borough upon agency staff is often discussed, and it's been discussed going back some years now. I'd be really interesting to hear what the response is in terms of any sort of ideas about how we can tackle this, because it has been an issue in Haringey for a very long time.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Carlin, like to come straight.
Hi, Lords. Thanks for that question. We take the level of agency staff that we have very seriously, and we are reducing the number of agency workers that we have in Haringey for a couple of reasons. First of all, the additional cost that we pay to agencies, which is an add-on cost, which is a lot of money, and also because we want people who work for Haringey to be committed and embedded in the borough and as employees. There are pressures on certain areas where it's very difficult to recruit full-time staff, and there will always be a certain fluctuation where agency workers where we have gaps. But in terms of what we're actually doing about that, because we are taking it very seriously, all directors have been given the list of all agency workers within their directorate and have been asked to come back with a reasonable end date for each agency worker, which they will be expected to adhere to. And in addition to that, I meet quarterly with Jess and I meet with the directors to actually discuss how they are reducing their agency staff numbers on a quarterly basis. And I'm pleased to say that in the meetings that we're having thus far, the numbers are reducing quite substantially. The actual figures for agency staff go to the, what's it called, the committee? General Purposes Committee as it's called a people paper, and that has details of all the members of staff in Haringey, but also the numbers of agency staff. The next one I'm assuming will go in February because that's the next meeting, and it doesn't report to every meeting, but the last time it reported was last year. And in that meeting there will be a substantial reduction. So this is something that we are absolutely committed to getting grip on, despite the difficulties that we are having in recruitment in certain areas. Thanks.
Thank you. I've got John as well. Thanks. So Lord, you can come back in, but John wants to just ask to answer your question as well.
But just to add that as we downsize the capital programme, sorry, my name is John O'Keefe, I'm Head of Finance. As we downsize the capital programme, as you'll see in the budget report, we're taking £396 million out of the capital programme. We have agency staff who are employed to deliver projects within the capital programme. And as that comes down, then those agency staff will be let go as well.
So sorry, Lords, I'm just checking.
No, thank you for that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to look around. Councillor Worrell.
Thank you. I just wanted to get a bit more clarity on there was an overspend, a small overspend in parks and leisure, which relates to salary pressures. And I just wondered if we could get a bit more explanation about that, because I think in the narrative it says additional operational facility management personnel costs where the existing budget does not fully cover the cost of the service. So just wondering kind of how those unaccounted for costs arose. And then there's also reference to one-off in-year underspends within the waste management service. And I wondered if you could just give a bit more background as to what that means in practice. One-off, some of the overspend has been mitigated by one-off in-year underspends within the waste management service.
I'm just looking who. Mark.
Mark.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, good evening. Mark Stevens, Assistant Director of Direct Services. So the 322k referred to in section 6.1 for Parks and Leisure actually refers to national non-domestic rates that are being wrongly applied corporately with a COVID discount and a period 4 reversal for traded service invoices to schools. So in that respect, both of those were completely out of our control and indeed difficult to mitigate against. So there's very little we can actually do on that particular score. In relation to the comment about operational facilities management, that's not related to the Parks and Leisure one. There's a separate commentary from the director in relation to the director overall. But again, that relates to there being insufficient budget to cover for staff absences and overtime. So sometimes the costs incurred in operational facilities management cannot be recharged back to clients. There are some measures being taken forward by the head of operational facilities management to try to recover some of that this year, but we are concerned that we might not recover all of that. I'm not in a position to comment on the adjustments in waste, I'm afraid. But hopefully those two comments in relation to OFM and Parks and Leisure are helpful.
Councillor Chandwani, are you?
Yeah, my understanding, and if it's wrong, then I can get a written correction to the committee. But I understand that the underspending waste is staff vacancy,
Okay, thanks.
which is why it's one off, because they've been recruited to.
Sorry, John.
Yeah. We have this £500,000 underspend in the community safety, waste and enforcement. In community safety, we have an underspend of around about £29,000 in the salaries budget for vacancies. And then in the ASB and enforcement team, we have somewhere in the region of £76,000 underspend in relation to vacancies that are being held within the service. The majority of the underspend relates to the actual waste management client and contracts budget, which is underspending by £430,000. And that will have the main component of that is the rebate that the council gets from Veolia in relation to pension contributions, which is like it's a very complicated formula in the monthly invoice that comes through, and that variation feeds through to a reduced contract price, and that's the majority of that. And obviously there were some recharges that have gone on to do full cost recovery, but the vast majority of that relates to this rebate that we get from Veolia in relation to the staff that tube it over.
So I'm just going to be really clear. Sorry, I might have missed it, and apologies. So on page 52 with the community safety, waste and enforcement, which was the overspend just mentioned by Councillor Worrell, when you say due to curtailing uncommitted maintenance and improvement works, what part of that is the, because I think the probably the concern that was initially raised is this maintenance works with pavements, or maintenance works for safety, for lighting or something. So I'm just making sure that that bit isn't related to anything to do with that part of the portfolio.
No, but none of the items you mentioned there have contributed to that underspend.
Right. So what's the maintenance improvement?
I would have to come back to you on that because it's probably of a level of detail that I don't have with me.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just checking to see if there's any other questions either online or in the room. That's good. So quite a lot of my questions have been asked, I think. So I'm looking at the IT part, and it said digital services, there's a £0.2 million pressure against contract related budgets. Now I note as we go through the papers, there's an awful lot on IT, so I'm sure we'll be mentioning this a lot more this evening. But could you just explain what's meant at this stage by that and that figure, what these pressures are? Thank you.
I'll make a start, and if Councillor Carlin wants to come in. My name's Jess Crowe, I'm Director of Culture, Strategy and Engagement, and my directorate includes digital and change services. The main pressures on our IT contracts are many of them are priced in other currencies, so in dollars, for example, so we've been hit by the exchange rate, but also just general inflation has particularly hit digital services and IT services. So, and that's a kind of across the sector. That's not peculiar to Haringey's contracts, but that is a particular issue in the different products that we have, whether that's numbers. The other thing that we've got contract pressure on is as the organisation changes size, we've insourced services. We therefore have to buy more licenses and more hardware to support the staff. So that's part of the cost of running the business.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question on that? We hear a lot about IT services and contracts, and I think there's always a concern amongst those who are uninitiated in this area that these sorts of contracts can escalate because, you know, they'll come back and say, oh, we can't do this. If you just buy this bit or get that extra bit, you can do it. What's the risk that you see for our financial position, just in terms of finance, around because we're doing quite a substantive move towards new digital services. In doing this at this point, is there a risk, or are you confident that you think actually no, the contracts will remain as is and we won't need to increase?
Yeah, I mean, you're right to highlight it, and it's, you know, clearly IT is something we, you know, it can become mired in jargon and the technical things. So there are two things. One is we do monitor it quite closely within the service. So we have a contracts management team that you know, has a huge spreadsheet of all of our contracts. So we try and keep track of them that way, and they are pretty good at negotiating. That then enables us to forecast. So you'll see that there is growth in the budget for new projects, so that we can sort of plan ahead, and we use things like framework contracts. So where we have to buy lots of different sorts of products, then we'll try and use the most advantageous way of purchasing them. So whether that's a framework contract where there's sort of multiple authorities buying the same thing, like our laptops program, for example, we would join that framework. There's a kind of economies of scale, which means they get better value, and we do always challenge that and check that it is still the most value for money approach. So there's sort of close monitoring within the service. I think the other thing that we've brought in over the last year is what's called, and it is a bit jargony, so I apologise, but enterprise architecture, which is having a look right across the business at all of the infrastructure that we might need in terms of IT, which, as you rightly say, we're gradually trying to digitise more and more. There's more products available. We have to make sure that we're buying things that are of benefit for the whole organisation, and we are not just buying the latest new shiny thing that a service might think is necessary, but if we have an existing product that could do something similar, that will almost always be better value than buying a new separate thing that we then have to connect into all of our existing systems. So we're trying to get a more organised approach to how we purchase products, and to take a have a set of principles that guide our purchasing. That means that we try and adopt things off the shelf rather than bespoking them and getting all of a special system just for us, which then is inevitably more expensive to maintain and replace, and also trying to reuse products rather than buy new ones. So if we can add something in, as I say, so often, I mean, an example, for example, is the recent contracts. There's Granicus and also Microsoft. So Microsoft E5, which is the latest version of Microsoft, the reason that we bought that enhanced version was because of the cybersecurity measures that it involved, and that enabled us to end contracts for a number of standalone cybersecurity products. So we're trying to do things in a more coordinated way, which will be, I think, better value for money in the long run. That helps.
Thank you, Jess. So I'm going to move on to section 6. Oh, sorry, Councillor White.
Thanks, Chair. So it's just coming back off your question on the digital services bit, Jess, you said that part of that overspend was related to pressures related to insourcing, the growth of the organisation, and therefore the increased need for licenses for IT. I suppose the first part of the question would be, so how does that break down? You know, you talked about exchange rate pressure as being part of that, and the other part was the growth of the organisation. And if that growth of the organisation is a significant part of that, then the follow-on question is, well, isn't that budgeted for when we're doing the insourcing? And I guess, I suppose then a recommendation would be to make sure that when we're doing something that involves growing the organisation, which obviously, you know, we have a commitment to insourcing as a council, that we make sure that both in IT and any other area of the council, that we are properly budgeting for any knock-on costs of that.
I think that that's certainly reasonable, but what we also have to recognize is that one of the reasons that we invest in digital, although we see the cost then in digital, is because it does save us money in other areas of the business. So we invest in digital, we may see additional spend on computer programs and on systems, but if those systems mean that everything works much more smoothly, etc., then we're going to see reduced costs. And we see that, for example, in procurement, where we have an e-procurement system that sits on top of everything, allowed us to get rid of a lot of programs underneath, but also makes everything work much more smoothly instead of officers kind of having to just move things from program to program and spreadsheet to spreadsheet. So it works better, it's more secure, but also will save us money in other areas. And in the same way with insourcing, we may see an additional cost because now we have to license, we have to pay people out of our, you know, this is no longer an outsourced contract, but in actual fact, by insourcing, we'll often see a reduction in what we're spending on the outsourced contract anyhow. So those are the kinds of things you might see an increase in one area, but you're going to see a reduction in other budgets in other areas because of this thing.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Councillor Colin. I think that really helps giving a little bit more meat on the bone, but I think I think Councillor White's recommendation in that area, I think probably still stands from a scrutiny's perspective as how backbenchers we sort of keep that oversight of what's occurring. There's one final bit that I would like to add. Sorry, Jess, before you come back in, is around, obviously, with all the furore we've just been hearing about when IT goes, you know, to the extreme, what reassurance do we have as councillors? Because they'll come on later in the budget proposals, but around that we don't lose that personal touch, that if somebody needs to get hold of us and something is going a bit, you know, not quite as it should do, maybe in the IT, that will happen at some point. IT, you know, isn't perfect. We're not perfect, but have we got that reassurance that when we're making these cost savings, that we're not talking about reducing? I know you said we're reducing the IT programs, but are we reducing staff that would be able to communicate with residents as well?
No, I mean, I think it's always a balance between, you know, efficiency and the human touch. But I think the argument that we'd make, and one of the things that we've spoken about a lot in terms of the resident experience programme, which Councillor Chamwani might want to talk about, is that importance of our staff being empowered to have a conversation with residents that can resolve a problem rather than just sticking to a rigid script. Such as, for example, you're the only person that's ever complained about Horizon IT. I think it was the example you were referring to. But rather than sticking to those sorts of scripts, that they are enabled to solve problems for residents and to ask questions and to engage with them. So that is very much part of what we're trying to do for when people do need help and do need that human interaction, if we can make the really simple transactions where there isn't a need to engage with a human, if we can make those as efficient and do as many of those sorts of things in that way through digital, that frees up our staff time to be able to help people who really do need support and assistance. And so it's the sort of digital first, but with a digital assist as part of the whole system. So it's not just everything's got to be digital, but you digitize the right things, and that makes you more efficient and frees up your resource to be able to do. And so we can see, and Councillor Carlin mentioned, and you'll see it in some of the growth around investment in the customer relationship management in Granicus, that is speeding up the transactions, and that's speeding it up for residents, but also for staff, so they can, you know, spend less time manipulating systems and more time answering questions and dealing as humans with other humans. So it is a bit of both, and it is always a balance between the two. But Councillor Kyne's absolutely right. If we can get the right IT, it enables us to do the people facing stuff, which is what our business is mostly about.
Thank you. So other than the recommendation made by Councillor White, was there anything that people wanted to note at this point, other than the fact that I've got more information coming from John O'Keefe around the uncommitted improvements and maintenance works under the community waste and safety and enforcement underspend figure that we mentioned earlier? Councillor White.
So just to reiterate that, I also asked if it was possible to get a breakdown between the elements that you mentioned, Jess, the exchange rate pressures and the
I'm sure we can get at least rough figures of, you know, it's the thing with inflation and the contracts is it's kind of a moving feast, but we can probably get a proportion between you know, what's to do with more licenses and what's to do with contract inflation pressures.
It would just be good to know whether the overspend in that area is whether it's a significant the pressure of expanding the organisation is significant.
Yeah, no, it's mostly to do with contract inflation and exchange rates and that kind of thing. So that is by far the biggest problem that we have, and we spend a lot of time really working through what the inflation pressures are going to be in future years, so that we can try and forecast better. But you'll appreciate that the inflation rate's been more unpredictable in recent years, so that's why it's been that is the significant and the most significant part of the problem.
Okay, so just checking with the panel if there's anything else they wanted to add. Right, okay, so moving on. Yvonne, did you want to ask? Sorry, I just wasn't sure if that was your hand up.
I would like to ask a question, if I may, about there was some money given to Chestnuts Park for the flooding in there. You know, you can't go in there if it's been raining, because you just get, well, sometimes it's halfway up your legs, the water, and that money has disappeared and none of us can find out where it's gone. It was quite a substantial amount that was given back in the summer, and it was to, you know, make sure that the drainage in the park was actually, you know, worked at, and none of us have been able to find out anything about where that money's gone. I'm not sure, I'm not 100% sure if it came from Fusion or what, but it would be nice if somebody could find out, because the park is a beautiful park. It's big, but it's not looked after for the community at all. So, you know, if you can, I would appreciate it.
Okay, Yvonne, thank you. We've got Downshill Park mentioned, but we're going to add Chestnuts Park into this. I'm just going to look to Councillor Chandwani. I'm not expecting you just because you've come on the screen, so you look like you're coming to answer something. That might be wrong.
Just want to get clarity on it. I know Councillor Arkell is also in the room. Yvonne, was this money from the GLA to do flooding works on La Rose Lane?
I'm not 100% sure. It's just that the parents have been driving me mad about it. And they said, you know, when are we going to get a park that our children can play football in, play baseball in, anything, but they can't play any kind of sports if it rains because the whole park is flooded. I've been through
Is
there
it
on
all
my.
right, Chair, if Mark Stevens can respond, because I'm not quite sure if it's flooding money or parks maintenance money that's been.
No, it was definitely for the flooding. They said when they gave the money that it was to deal with the flooding in the park.
Yeah, I understand that. So I'm going to ask Mark Stevens if he can come in, because there is a pot of money to help with the flooding on La Rose Lane, which is involved in the park. But this might be something different. So I'll let Mark come in.
Actually, before he does that, I'm going to jump in. Sorry. We have received money from the GLA to deal with some of the flooding on La Rose Lane, as Councillor Chandwani has said. We took a decision just before Christmas that actually that piece of work would not go ahead, and the reason for that was because we could not be assured that Thames Water could deal with the misconnections in the area, which might have meant that there was water that was of very poor content coming into the park. So we've actually put that project on hold. We are looking at and working with the GLA to see how we may be able to repurpose that money. I'm going to stop there and ask Mark to come in, because this may relate to the master plan for the park, which we are working with the Friends of Chestnuts Park quite closely to develop and work on in the future.
Yes, so through the chair, thank you. So in terms of the funding, it is indeed from the GLA. It is for a flood alleviation scheme to deal with some flooding risk to 98 properties downstream, as well as to deal with some of the flooding issues that take place in Chestnuts Park. The issue was one that went through to planning subcommittee just before Christmas. And the committee resolved to grant planning permission. However, there was a petition of over 1,000 people who were against the scheme, as well as the Friends of Chestnuts Park also not wanting the scheme to go ahead either. So we're left in a bit of a quandary as to how we tackle the issue that you described in terms of flooding from winter, just ordinary rainfall, but then making sure that we've actually got a system that will still work in the summer, because some of the attenuation of the water would be through reed beds, and those reed beds, for example, would not last if there is no inflow of water, which would have come from the other source of the surface water sewer, which we are dependent upon Thames Water resolving. Because it's very complicated, because of those objections, we're reviewing our current options. We have a meeting with the GLA on Friday where we will review the situation and, if possible, come up with an alternative, which might be repurposing the money if we can. However, if we can't, then unfortunately it looks like we might have to give that funding back, because it does actually, it should be spent by the end of this financial year. So hopefully that's helped the committee and yourself in terms of that question.
Okay, thank you, Yvonne. It sounds like something that's going on with the Friends of Chestnut Park and yourselves. So I'm wondering if, Yvonne, if you could sort of link in with the Friends of Chestnut Park, maybe?
Well, I can go round there to them, but you know, it's just a group of people that just want things to stay derelict. They don't want anything to be done there at all, because we tried to get certain things done there, you know, like myself and the outsiders, you know, I've got a huge amount of grandchildren and great grandchildren, but we can't go round there if it's been raining, because the water, the 5-year-old who loves going round there and play, she can't go because it comes up to her knees when she's running through it. I don't mind her getting wet, but
Okay, so this sounds probably slightly more detailed than we can do tonight and do it justice, but I do think that Councillor Arkle and I think, you know, we've had some beginnings of an explanation for you this evening, but I think really joining that up with the Friends of Chestnut Park and any other community group that wants to be involved, I'm sure would be sort of interested in that.
The building there is run by the Bridge Renewal Trust.
Okay.
And even they can't penetrate it. And it shouldn't be allowed that a certain group of people dominate it.
I think that's probably a discussion for offline and with the groups. So, but thank you, Yvonne, for raising it this evening, because obviously that's an issue that's close to your heart and other residents. But I think we'll take that offline and we'll pick it up.
Okay.
Can I just come in as the finance lead? I can assure you that the money has not disappeared. Okay, so let's just be very clear in this meeting. There was no money that disappeared. There was a proposal for the park, but it was problematic. There was one proposal put forward and then another proposal put forward, and both those proposals were really problematic. And it wasn't just that the Friends didn't want them, there were problems with the proposals. Okay, so they couldn't go ahead. Now, obviously, as a borough, we would want to invest and use any funding that was granted to us to invest in our assets and to invest in our parks, to do things to reduce flooding, for example. But we have to ensure that in doing that, it is something that will benefit the park, and the problems that were predicted or could have happened, which as Councillor Alcala said, those are the reasons that it can't go ahead. But I just wanted to be very clear. There's no not being able to get to the bottom of this, or nobody knows where the money's gone. This has been very transparently dealt with. The proposals went to planning committee. This has been transparently dealt with, that there have been problems with both of those so far, both of the proposals that have come forward for Chestnut Park. Now, officers, I'm sure will be looking at other proposals, but there's no money that has gone missing. Everything has been done completely transparently. We know what money is there. Everybody knows what money is there, but it's whether we can actually bring forward a plan for the park that will work for the park. That's where we are at the moment, just for clarity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and thanks, Yvonne, for bringing that up. So, but thank you very much. Yvonne, if you could just put your mic off, that's lovely. Thank you. Until the next question. Thank you very much. Right, moving on to page 52 at 6.2, we've got the Environment and Resident Services outturn position and the Culture Strategy and Engagement outturn position. So we've got a couple of areas within this. Before we start on these two areas, Francis, are you able just to sort of clarify what specifically part of the environment and resident part of this budget we're looking at, and then what part of the budget we're looking under the culture strategy and engagement outturn position in, just very briefly? If not, we can just go through the papers, but I just wanted to know if you wanted to clarify, because I know we're picking apart another area's portfolio tonight because we're having it under OSC, which we haven't always had. Thank you.
I think I just refer people back to the table in section 6.1 on the top of page 51, which sets out the areas that this committee is looking at tonight. And I think probably it's best then to go on to the appendices and have a look at the proposals that relate to these services.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any questions from the committee on this section at page 552 and page 53? Yeah, Councillor White.
Thanks. Just wanted to clarify. I think we've spoken about this off outside this meeting, but I just wanted to clarify that the culture strategy and engagement line in table 7.1A, just to fully understand that, you're saying that this is previous growth which is now being withdrawn for certain reasons, with the exception that this is happening across the 5 years of the MTFS, but in the 26-27, the reason you've got a positive figure there is that 550,000 that's being put in to pay for the elections.
Yes, Councillor White, it is the case. And that culture's, I have to say, about all the tables that we've put in here, these don't reflect the panel or the committee scopes. They are the management structure of the council, which does make things slightly confusing, but you are correct in what's included in that line there in table 7.1A.
Just to be really clear, when we say the management structure of the council, if somebody's listening online that doesn't really understand what we're talking about at this point, what are we actually telling people that we're doing in this section?
So the table in this section sets out how the council, I suppose, on a day-to-day basis runs its activities, whereas this committee and the areas that this committee is looking at and scrutinising tonight covers part of the culture strategy engagement, the corporate area, and part of environment and resident experience.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so I'm looking around for colleagues. Are there any questions on that? I think I had a couple. So why have we got, it says, why is the reassignment of the NNDR? And I'm assuming that means business rates. Okay, good, because I Googled that earlier. It says it's a one-off. Why is it a one-off at this point? Is it not sort of, wouldn't that be sort of an ongoing? Sorry, that's at page 52, 6.2, and it just said the overspend can be partly attributed to any reversal, and it continues, and a reassignment of NNDR to leisure services, which are a one-off and additional operational facility management personnel costs. So I was just wondering why that would be a one-off and not the business rates would be one-off. Surely don't business rates continue? I'm just trying to unpick that sentence. Thanks, John.
Yeah, it's because of we didn't capture that in a particular year. It wasn't billed against this department in that year. So if you were to look at the 2 years together, we would have had an underspend in 1 year to deal with the fact that we haven't been charged NNDR. We have an overspend because it's now caught up with that, but take the 2 years together and there is no financial effect. And that's why it's a one-off. It's in the base budget, it just wasn't charged in 1 year.
Thank you, that's really helpful. I've got something about an underspend on green waste. I'm just wondering, so I've got how does the underachievement of green waste factor into these savings? I think they were saying the directorate has several budget pressures, the most significant of which are the underachievement of the bulky waste and the green garden waste income. So the question for me is, if this has been underachieved, what we're going to do about it as a council? So if it's not being achieved, what's the plan for this, the green waste collection? Is it 6.2?
So just double step for a second. So this is with this section here in section 6.2, as it's written there, is largely addressing the 23-24 position. So we have pressures in there. These have been offset by the underspend in waste and by other actions. There are management actions being undertaken to reduce that expenditure. And in general, the service is managing those pressures on a day-to-day basis. So it's just a whole raft of management actions that will be undertaken in order to keep expenditure down and within the limits that we have set for them through their cash limits. So it just will be a lot of action. So we wouldn't necessarily see those pressures addressed in future years because they're almost de minimis, like below the line, below the threshold. So they're able to contain that. And so that's what they're going to do. So we won't be looking for growth to come to deal with that because of the financial situation we find ourselves in.
Sorry, I think it might be the time of night. So I'm just checking what you've said to me about the green waste underachievement of the green garden waste income, does that mean that the council will leave it as an underachievement because it's below a financial threshold and therefore we're not going to concentrate in on it? Or are you saying to me that actually you're going to relook at how that income is trying to be generated and maybe come up with other ideas?
I can come in if you want me to, Chair.
Councillor Chandwani.
Thank you. So I guess there's two things here. I think with the garden waste, what's been looked at is a remodelling of the rounds. What we've seen is a capacity issue. So in places like N10, N6, where we have larger gardens, we can take on, and I'm just making these figures up to just illustrate, we could take on 10 new customers and then the truck will be full. And then in some other parts of the borough where the architecture is smaller and the gardens are smaller, then when we can take on 20 customers and then the truck will be full. And so the model is kind of based on how much capacity the trucks can take, and they do a different postcode each day. So what we're looking at now is how we can reconfigure the rounds so that we could take some N10 and some N17 on a Monday, and then some N15 and N6 on a Tuesday, and so that we have a balance of the size of gardens, so therefore we can take more capacity. So that's with the green waste. With the bulky waste, at the current rate that it's at £20 for 4 items, and for us to achieve £400,000, we would need 20,000 sales a year. The maximum capacity we've got with the current crew and the current the current number of staff that work on that department and the size of the truck, we can take a maximum of 12,000 sales a year. So what we're trying to do is and we're getting at about 12,000 a year sales. If we now want to upscale and get another truck and another crew to get to that, then we've got to offset the amount of money it's going to cost us to get another truck and another crew in order to make the 400,000. And we're trying to figure out whether that now still works in the current financial climate. So when these targets were first set, the financial climate was different, and we were charging £25 for 5 items. So we're looking to kind of re-baseline and re-figure out all of these, so that when we come back, we stop telling you that we can't do it, and that it's more in line with what we can do. I think what John O'Keefe is kindly saying is that he and the finance team and the finance pressure will still be expecting 400,000, but it might not necessarily be from bulky waste. We might have to look at different ways of making sure that we still offer up £400,000. We won't be given, if we could only make 200,000, we won't be given back 200,000 from the budget. I hope that kind of makes sense.
Thank you, Councillor Chandwani. I thought we'd have quite a detailed response because this is your area. So I think for me it does, but I think the proof is in the pudding, and I suppose it's next year when we're looking at that line again. It's has that been achieved? And I think it's just interesting to note it was here, and I was just really interesting to see and hear what you're doing. But it does sound like there's a lot going on behind the scenes. So thank you for that. I've got one more question on this. Has anyone got anything? Otherwise, I'll ask my question quickly. Okay, so at the end of this on 6.2, there's a budget proposal includes a growth of 1 million to meet the cost in the new leisure service provision and other minor changes. Can I just ask, is that a capital growth or is that a revenue? Is that money going into revenue, Councillor Arkell?
I'm going to hand over to Mark.
Thank you, Councillor Arkell. No, it's a revenue growth, and it relates to the additional resources required to operate the insourcing of the service. It reflects in some part the conversation you're having earlier on about the need to cover off resources in relation to IT and etc. So there's a broad range of services that sit under the I think it's 946k, which appears in one of the other tables a bit later on in terms of the growth proposals. But as I said earlier on, that section in section 6.2 is the summary from the director for this current financial year and looking forward into 24-25 and beyond.
Okay, thank you, Councillor White.
Thanks, Chair. So just for the record, of that £1 million revenue growth to meet the cost of new leisure services provision, what proportion of that reflects the paying the staff and giving them the terms and conditions that council staff have compared to what they would have with an outsourced provider?
I can't recall that figure off the top of my head, Councillor. So obviously we can feed that information back to you at a later stage.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we'll request that information for the next meeting, just have it so you've got an answer to that. Thank you, Mark. Okay, so is there any other questions on this side of the papers? There are some tables that we've discussed now. Obviously, we're not going to go through these in details because obviously, as has been explained to us by Francis, they go across different portfolios and we were only seeing a section of them tonight. I was going to ask one very quick question across all the tables on the corporate section. I know you've got some sort of explanation underneath, but just because it's such a large figure, we've got the service growth section at 6.3 at table 7.1a of total growth of £23 million. New growth proposal, we've got an extra £6.8 million up until 2027, and that gives us a total of £29.9 million. So just really briefly, is it possible to explain to us just what this actually entails and why this growth is seeming to go up? And will it, I know you're expecting it to continue, because I noticed it stops at 2027. I was just wondering if that's because we couldn't predict those figures in that detail.
Yeah, thank you. A brief explanation for those, as you say, they are quite significant sums of money. In broad terms, the pre-agreed growth that was in the previous MTFS covers a growth for pensions increases. So every 3 years we have a revaluation, a triennial revaluation of our pension fund, and we get advice whether we need to increase the amount we spend the employer contribution or reduce it. The last one indicated that we needed to put more money in, so some of that's around that. Obviously, you'll be aware that this time last year we were expecting significant inflation in the economy, so we built in additional budget for the pay award and for non-pay inflation generally, so that was quite sizable. We also built in a small amount for North London Waste Authority, so we're expecting to spend more money over the coming years on that. And also, as you're aware, and previous scrutiny has looked quite intensely at the capital programme, we've built in additional revenue to fund the capital programme. So that was all the pre-agreed stuff. In this year's draft budget that went in December, we've revisited the inflation assumptions and had to build in some additionality there. And we've also revisited some of the assumptions on levies. So the North London Waste Authority, we think we could reduce it down a little bit. We've had some one-off benefit from the concessionary fares that we get charged from the GLA and London councils, which is beneficial. It's come down a bit. And we built in a small growth for the apprenticeship levy that we have to pay as a large organisation. So those are the areas that cover off that corporate growth. Okay.
Thank you. But the last part of that question was, are you expecting it to sort of continue to go up based on everything that you've just outlined?
So obviously, this isn't an easy thing to forecast. I mean, nothing ever is it? But particularly a lot of these are impacted by the wider economic environment. So, which is why things are tapering off slightly as we go forward, because this uncertainty becomes such that it's just not very meaningful to put in a significant growth. However, Councillor Carney has also just mentioned that there's been a lot of work leading up to the December Cabinet report to review the capital programme and to try and reduce that down. So that is having some impact as well. Okay.
Thanks. So just on the table 7.2b, the second part of that, where it says there were no written off savings in the committee area, but obviously we've got an appendix. Well, we had a supplementary appendix, which is a corrected version of the one originally circulated in the papers, which does have some undelivered savings. So could you just confirm that that's not actually correct, what's written in the papers here?
Yeah, Councillor White, thank you for bringing that to the attention of the committee. You're correct. The December draft report did actually review the existing savings programme and recognise that some of them were no longer deliverable for a variety of reasons. And the most significant of that is it's actually in 25-26. So there was an assumption that we can make some savings in relation to the renegotiation of the waste contract. That's taking longer to come to fruition, and also early indications suggest that that saving may not be of that level. So to be prudent, that's been written out of the budget, and obviously as work continues with that revisiting of that significant contract, we can re-engage with that, and maybe this time next year come forward with a new proposal. There's going back to the green waste discussion. We are writing off the residual amount of the green waste that was in future years. So as 20k and 20k in future years have also been written off. And there's one item within. So this time last year, some proposals were put forward about savings around improved debt recovery. So bringing in more income into the organisation. They're not being written off, but there's a recognition that actually they're finite. So obviously, if we've got a set of arrears, £6 million arrears, once that's collected, it's collected. It's not an ongoing saving. So that has now been recognised and is being written out in 25-26.
Sorry, Chair, where are we going up to in this section? Which page?
So at the moment, we were as far as, I think you said page 55, and it was at the bottom of page 55 at table 7.2.
Because I had something relating to 7.2C, but we might be skipping forward.
No, please do.
Shall I?
Yeah.
Could I just check? So management actions, so all of the numbers without a minus in front of them are savings that are going to be made, and then the environment and resident experience is that an overspend in 25-26 with the minus 35? I just wondered what that relates to.
So that's page 56, table 7.2C under management actions, and it's the first, second, third, fourth, fifth line down, environment and resident experience.
Sorry, Councillor Arcott, we haven't got that detail to hand. Can we provide the answer for the next ahead of the next committee?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so if there's anything else on the tables that any other members wanted to raise, I'm looking to see if there's anything. Lords, no. Okay, I'm just checking. So one final question I'll ask on page 57 then before we leave this section to go to the appendices is that obviously you spoke at the beginning, Francis and John, about the bigger picture, the summary revenue position. Obviously, this is a very small section of this, but obviously as backbenchers and scrutineers tonight, we're looking at the risks, obviously around anything to do with the finances for the council. Can I just confirm that this table is still correct, that in 2024-25, further savings to be identified? We've got it at 16.3. It's then in brackets at 30.4, and then the following 26-27 is 44.1. That does seem very substantive. So I'm just checking what those figures are saying to us and what your understanding is around the figures in that table. Thank you.
So, Councillor, that was the position in the draft budget report, and the introduction and the chief finance officer's comment made very clear that further work was going to be taking place between now and then. So those figures, when you see the full report on the 6th of Cabinet, 6th of February, will be significantly reduced. That was the forecast gap at that point.
That's very reassuring. Thank you very much. Anything to do with reducing the overspend of the amount of savings we need to make, sorry, is obviously fantastic news. Okay, and we'll wait to hear about that, Councillor White.
Sorry, just to clarify what you just said, because that column, that figure in the second column of 16.386 million, it's not just going to be reduced. Presumably that will reach zero. Just you're still intending on that to be the case in 3 weeks' time when the
Sorry,
when
we
the
will be
papers are published.
passing a balanced budget, and the figures, the exact figures, will be in the cabinet report in February. But yes, we will be passing a balanced budget.
I think it would also, Councillor Cullen, to say that you've got a further overview and scrutiny committee on, I think it's on the 1st of February, I believe, that will cover off anything that's appropriate that's come forward between the December cabinet report and now that needs to have a further review by yourselves.
Thank you. That's really clear. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're moving on to the appendices. So we've got the medium-term financial savings tracker for this part of the committee's portfolio to look at tonight. It says period 6 at the top, and it is actually on. There should be a new one put out for. Okay, sorry, I'm going to hand over to my scrutiny officers to do a quick comment on this.
Yeah, so just to note, there was a slightly revised version of Appendix 3, which was provided this afternoon. Those of you who are online, you should have received an email from me with the new version. It's just a minor formatting issue, really. It's just about lining up the descriptions with the correct items, but it may be easier to follow if you have that version online. For those of you here in the room, hopefully most of you have a copy of it, a paper copy of it. I've got one spare one if anyone doesn't have one, but hopefully everybody's then got the revised version.
Okay, so we're moving on now to, I'm going to ask for questions. I'm sure there'll be a few on this. So I'm looking to see if anyone wants to, which one start?
Thanks, Chair. Oh, yeah, I didn't necessarily always want to go first.
Pick off the mark, then Councillor Worrell.
Thank you, Chair. So just a clarification, because obviously there was an issue with the table that's presented in the papers, as Dominic's pointed out. But what I wanted to ask was in the table that was provided in the original papers on page 123, the first line in that table, in the description column, is a saving that relates to reducing the number of people eligible for concessionary rates at Fusion leisure centres. Now, there's no saving in the new version that relates to that. So I just wanted to confirm that there was a saving that was agreed last year that related to that, and to ask whether that was delivered, because we have a similar saving relating to New River, which is being proposed for this year. So I think it is important for us to know whether this saving was delivered.
I think Mark Stevens will probably be a better place to answer that.
Sorry, slight delay in getting my mic back on again. So in terms of that saving, I don't think it has been delivered because of the issue with Tottenham Green being closed off. So I think that is still shown as a red in the table, but there are additional savings proposed in relation to New River going forward. That's my recollection of it.
Can
Very
I just
difficult to
ask,
see. It's in such small font on the page. Sorry.
Chair, can I just ask? I don't think the description is matching the proposal. The proposal is about full cost recovery of service. Is that right?
We had a mismatch of the hence the reasoning for getting the new table put together. So I think it's just that Councillor White noted. Well, actually, I'm going to let Councillor White explain.
I'll do my best. So the table that is in the papers that were circulated a week ago, something went wrong with the formatting of that Excel spreadsheet, and the description doesn't match up with the other columns, which makes it impossible to understand what the saving is and which savings have been achieved and which haven't. So for that reason, that problem having been identified, a new version was circulated to committee members at lunchtime today, and Dominic has apparently just circulated it to everybody who's attending virtually by email. So that should show, if you can see that should show the actual status, RAG rating status of the savings that were proposed last year. But what I'm trying to point out with this question is that the saving relating to Fusion Leisure Centre, how's it put? Sorry, concessionary rates. That's now fallen off the new version of the table. So I think Mark has confirmed that it's not been achieved, which obviously then leads us as a committee to ask, well, is the proposal, given the non-achieved status of that saving, is the proposed, or how confident can you be about the new proposal for New River?
So if I can come back on that one, that saving that we're talking about in relation to Fusion relates to what we'd be able to do with Fusion, which, as the committee will appreciate, would be difficult to achieve. However, as was discussed in the meeting last week, we've had a significant success at New River and been able to do lots of new initiatives. So we're a lot more confident that the savings that are being proposed for New River will give us a very different outcome from what we're expecting with Fusion. So of the 170,000, I think is shown in the table over the 5 years concerned, 40,000 of that I think we've identified will come from electricity and energy reduction savings. About 100k would actually come from new income streams where we're able to offer new activities at the New River site, various events, and the rest of that would come from revised fees and charges. There's also reference in, I think, to changes to the or consideration of the concessionary rates that are on offer at New River, and I believe that's because they have not been looked at for 15 years. So whilst we're not suggesting that the concessionary charges at New River are going to deliver any part effectively of that 170k, it's still something that we would wish to look at to make sure that they are more valid today than they were when they were last looked at 15 years ago. So hopefully that answers your question and gives some reassurance that that is a saving that we seriously do believe that we can achieve, rather than the saving that has not been possible to achieve with Fusion.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think that was a saving on Appendix 5, wasn't it? The new revenue saving proposals on New River, just to be really clear that that's where.
Yes, apologies. That was kind of jumping ahead, but it was because the problem with the yeah.
I know. I was just linking that up for everyone. Okay, thank you. So right, on to the MTFS savings tracker. So I've got Councillor Worrell who indicated a question on this, and then Councillor Gunes. Councillor Simmons-Saffold? Oh, you should have this big one. Okay, right, okay, so we'll go with Councillor Worrell.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a couple of the savings on here are marked as they've been delivered, but the sort of they're marked green as having been delivered, but then the future prospect is amber. So that's on the increased park events income, and I think also on the commercial advertising opportunities. So I just wondered what that sort of future uncertainty is about if these have been delivered so far.
I think again that's probably one for Mark and his area.
It's a busy evening for me, isn't it? So in terms of the events income from commercial and other events in parks, we've been able to achieve that for this financial year. So that's been a positive. The reason it's shown for amber is that we don't necessarily have any fixed plans in terms of where those that income will come from, and until we've actually got those mapped out, we're just approaching it with a degree of caution. That's probably the best way to describe it.
And the other one relating to advertising.
Sorry. Yes, so there's the original saving. Are you looking at, oh, so it's the top one, isn't it? So I think, so we had quite a I mean, they're kind of slightly out. So the original saving for this year had come from 22-23 was quite a small amount. It was only 6,000, and so that has been delivered. So it's from the digital on-street advertising, and I mean that doesn't really roll forward into the future. But then the saving underneath, which was a newer saving, is the one that we are struggling with, and that was. The plan when we put forward the saving was to put in a new large digital screen on River Park House. Given we're not using the building, get something from it. That has taken longer to realise as a project. So there was a planning, we had to put a planning application process. There was quite a lot of work to examine the sort of feasibility of it, and then we had to go out to tender. And so the reason it's amber is that it went out to tender just before Christmas, and we were just not sure whether we were going to realise the amounts that we had estimated were going to be deliverable. So we'd hoped to achieve something like 128k at the time this was written. We thought, well, we might still get that, but it will be late, and so we won't get the full year. So we're trying to make up that saving through more smaller sites and that kind of thing. In actual fact, the tender has come back lower than 128, so it will be a challenging saving to realise, and we will have to look for other sites and bolster it. But one of our proposals this year is to do a sort of invest to earn to get some more resource in, because one of the things that we've struggled with is just having the capacity to take forward this proposal. So if we want to do more, I think we think it's a good thing to do. It's a thing that you see increasingly. We've got a lot of assets. We should be able to find more sites on which to put advertising, and so we've put in an invest to earn sort of proposal to generate more income and do that work to find alternative sites that will hopefully make up that shortfall, but it is all amber because it's not in the bag.
Great, thank you. So one of my questions is, Chair, it's relevant to this table, but one of them is quite general about the future, because we know that we haven't concluded the budget process. Like, it's not okay. I will begin by first one. I noticed that obviously quite a few areas are red, so that means the proposed savings have not been achieved. What will happen to them? Are they gonna repurposed in a way, or like what will happen to those savings? that are not being achieved, and also, and I had a question on one of the AMBA category as well. Okay, the single person discount review. So I don't understand what does this, like, what is it in relation to? So it's like IT related system that we invested on, was supposed to help us achieve some of the savings. I know that's probably Sima's area. So I just, the reason it's still in amber, it's obviously there is potential to make it achievable. So I just wanted to understand what gives us reason that it's still achievable, and why didn't it work out this year? Why couldn't we achieve that saving in full? These are my questions in relation to that. Should I come back for my second question later after I receive some response? Great, okay.
Thank you, Chair. I can only answer the last one if that's okay.
That's fine, thank you.
Okay, so myself and hopefully Andy will help me out. So the single person discount is something that you get on council tax. So if you are the only adult in your home, or the only liable adult in your home, then you get 25% off your council tax. And people get this, and if they get married or they get a flatmate, or one of their kids gets over 18, they're meant to hand back their single person discount. And it's something that we're working on, because we believe that there are people that have two adults in their household but are still claiming a single person discount. So the reason we had to use IT is because we've got 117,000 households in the borough, and the way that we can check if there's two adults in there is to use certain types of software, and this one particularly, the one that we procured, is kind of the same ones that credit agencies use. And so we're able to see if there is two people living in the house that might have credit on two credit cards, or they might have own two cars, or they, you know, there's different things that are triggering off. There might be two bank accounts with two adults in there. And so what this software does, instead of us having to go through every single household one by one, is it starts to match, actually, there's more than one person living in this house, more than one person living in this house, etc., etc. And then we issue out a standard letter, template letter out to them, and ask them quite politely if there's any changes to their circumstances, and could there be another person living in their house. And then hopefully they would confirm, or they would say, no, it's my son, but he actually might have his car here, but he's moved to university, and so that's fine. So we're just doing those kind of checks. We should be doing them quite regularly. This is the first time we've done it using technology, so it's a kind of more swift and efficient way. It's taken us a little bit of extra time to kind of procure this, and for them to do the matching. The reason it's amber is because we started, I think, on the 7th of November, and we've already sent the letters out. And we're starting to get results back from that, where people are actually saying, yeah, my son's now 18 and I forgot to tell you, or yeah, I've got married, and therefore that's how we're making the money, because they're giving back their 25%. We're doing them in batches, so we haven't sent them out to everybody that's matched, because otherwise we'll be overwhelmed with responses back. So we're quite confident that the process is now started, but we realise that we're a little bit behind because of the whole procurement and the whole matching exercise. And we did take guidance last time, because people felt that some people might have not given back their single person discount because they've just never heard of what a single person discount was, and they didn't realise that they had to give it back. So we're running quite a robust comms campaign to say, congratulations, you've been married, but by the way, you might need to give back your single person discount. And also likewise, there's people that might not realise that they're eligible for a single person discount. So there is some offset that people might actually start to get 25% off their council tax. So hopefully that answers it. Sorry sorry it came out as more of a technical thing, but in font 2 somewhere on this spreadsheet it does say council tax, but maybe we should make that a little bit clearer what we mean by single person discount. So I hope that answers your question. I don't know if Andy wants to add.
Thank you, Councillor. No, that's pretty much spot on. Just to, sorry, Andy Briggs, Assistant Director of Resident Experience. Just to add, the original pro forma on this was to identify a 5% reduction of the 38,000 households that have single person discount. Our initial trawl through Experian and Credit Reference Agency, which we've used the system that Councillor Chamwani has just described, has shown a greater number that has a financial footprint in the last 12 months. So as Councillor Chamwani has just said, we're doing that soft engagement first of all, just to inquire. So we feel confident about the delivery of this because we've seen that there is the ability to recollect. It's then the process of collection. So that's why it's showing as an amber at the moment, because we're taking a softer approach to give people time to make contact with us and come back. This will run into next year as well, so we expect to see a gain in income on this next year.
Okay, thank you. Right, we've got the first question to be answered around the red rag rated savings. Was there somebody able to come back and give an answer as to why we think that those savings might be achieved in the following part of the MTFS if they haven't been achieved so far? And I've got Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I can certainly comment on the one for fleet. One of the issues we had for fleet is that the management of the council's fleet has been split between two directorates, between Environment and Resident Experience for about a third of the fleet, and the other 2/3 sits with placemaking and housing. So to actually develop a comprehensive and unified fleet strategy, really and truly, fleet management needs to sit in with one part of the council, rather than actually trying to take it in two different directions. So part of the discussion over the last 12 months has been about bringing the fleet management service into one directorate, which would be placemaking and housing. So for that reason, the saving identified of 50k for this financial year has not been achieved. And because the transfer hasn't quite happened yet, I've left the RAG rating in for 24-25, and the achievement of the 100k altogether as read as well, because it will take some time to deliver. However, I think that colleagues in finance and myself are reasonably confident that some level of saving can be achieved. But it will be down to the placemaking and housing directorate to achieve that by developing a fleet strategy and then progressing that in due course of time. So that addresses that one. I can't unfortunately comment on any of the other ones, but I think in some ways they may have already been covered already.
Okay, thank you. So I know you had a follow-up, sorry, Councillor Gunes. Before you do that, can I just jump in on the question that you asked? It's just about we're asking Tottenham to recover the full costs of match day cleaning or cleansing on this thing. I've sat here for many years and this seems to keep coming up. I recognise this line. Yeah. So I'm just wondering, at what point are we going to be able to get some money back from Spurs regarding their contributions for match day cleaning? Because it always like hopeful, but it never seems to. Anyway. So I'm just going to ask either Councillor Chandwani's come straight on.
So I guess there's two things here. I think when it's come up before, we didn't have a stadium because it was being built. And then when it's come up again, there wasn't any real matches because there was COVID, and so there was a ban on a lot of matches, or they were under 10,000. And now we're hitting the kind of first real kind of 18 months where we've had real events and matches. So the issue is actually not with the events, so nothing to do with Lady Gaga or Beyonce. That they've been covered under a different situation with the planning of those events, but this comes down to planning, the LAMP and what it's agreed. and what it's not agreed. So myself and Councillor Carlin, when Councillor Carlin was the cabinet member for planning, had met with the directors and assistant directors and said that they really need to get back to negotiations with this. The LAMP has been reviewed. And in that review, this is one of the things that is being picked up. I don't know if Councillor Carlin knows, because now it sits under Councillor Williams, when that review is taking place and what it's covering, but it's definitely covering this, and when that is hoping to conclude. Until then, we have to keep it on, because residents are paying for a clean-up. And we need to keep challenging that, and we need to get full cost recovery for it. I think we're moving in the right direction, but I think you're right, it's totally slow, and I'm a little bit worried that we might be here in 5 years' time and it might still be on the agenda. But I don't know if Councillor Carlin wants to add anything to it.
No, I'm sorry. Unfortunately, I have no further update. Obviously, this is something that we need to push for quite strongly, because as Councillor Chanwani says, it's really not fair for our residents throughout paying council tax to have to pay for the cleanup of a commercial event being held at Spurs Stadium, and it's just completely unacceptable. I don't think it happens at other stadiums, and Spurs really need to do that. It's not a huge sum of money for them, but it is a huge sum of money for us. And I will pick up with Councillor Williams, but I'm not sure where we are at the moment on that. Thank you.
So I was just going to say something and then.
Sorry, I'm just saying, I don't know if Councillor Carlin feels the same, but if it wants to be one of your really strong, bold, in capital letters recommendations, I don't think I'll be upset about it.
How did you guess? How did you? I think yes, you took the words right out of my mouth. I think I was going to say, and I don't know about Councillor White might be adding to this before, but I definitely think we should make a very strong recommendation that Spurs is sort of that negotiations go on with Spurs. It'd be really helpful to understand if Councillor Williams has got any further update via that planning part for the committee to understand how that is working, and if there's any further pressure. I just think raising it up isn't a bad thing, and I think for us it's good to sort of say my concerns are around that red rag rated Spurs lack of cleaning up on match day. But Councillor White.
Well, I mean, obviously the cleaning is going on regardless. We're paying for it. So it seems to me that part of the negotiation should be that Spurs should know, however long the negotiations take, that Spurs pay backdated for the cleaning that's already taken place since the stadium opened.
Okay, well, I think we've got resounding approval on that as a recommendation. So we can always go in strong and then see where we get to, Councillor Colin. But yes, I think that's sort of an absolute recommendation from the committee. Okay, so I'm going to move on because I know that Councillor Guinness wanted to say something in more of a general question, then I've got Councillor Simon-Saffo who wants a question.
Okay, so my sort of more general question is around, I mean, the other day when we were discussing the budget setting for children and young people, obviously, we know that a great portion of the service kind of budget is protected because it's demand-led plus like statutory responsibility type of service. So even though we were kind of like basically my question is, now we still have a 16 point something million gap. Where else would we try to get this resource? I mean, the gap, narrow the gap so that we have a budget, a balanced budget by the end of the process. So I'm just kind of like, I suppose, like some sort of political assurance from both Councillor Arkell and Councillor Carling and Councillor Chadwani that whatever the further cuts. The reality is we agree that we need to set up a budget balance, and to do that, like, we just want some sort of reassurance that please don't go hard on, you know, frontline services or like most needed kind of services. But I suppose I'm just trying to kind of understand at the same time, like, where else are we looking for additional money to balance the budget?
I think we'll start with Councillor Carlin, as it's her sort of portfolio. Thank you.
Yes, and I think that we always need to remember what a budget is for. And a budget is there to support the council's corporate plan and our ambitions for the borough. And so whatever we do in terms of the budget, we'll always have that at the back of our minds. And so the budget changes that we will make will always have the aim of supporting our residents and our most vulnerable residents and the services that they rely on. And obviously that's something that we will take very seriously as a council, not just on the political side, but also the officer side, because the budget is to support our corporate plan. So that's the, this will come back to scrutiny, and as I said, the budget papers for February will be printed 2 weeks before, will come out about 10 days before the actual the cabinet meeting in February. But you can be assured that's at the forefront of everything that we think about. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's probably as much as you're going to be able to get, I think, from that question this evening. Councillor Simmons-Sapping.
Hello, good evening, everybody. Councillor Worrell did ask a question, because I was curious to understand why it went from red to amber, but that's been answered. My question is relating to the second page, period 6, and it is the cabinet decision in digital together. The comment in relation to the RAG rating status. At the bottom of that, it says work underway to assign a target to each service area in a bid to rethink the way these savings are achieved. I would like to understand about who is round the table when you're doing your rethinking, because Haringey Council is committed to co-production. And so I'm curious to understand who's round the table when those decisions are being made. How far are you casting your net? Because we always know when budgets happen and things have to be cut, some people feel the impact more than others. And I am deeply concerned about health inequalities and inequalities throughout the borough. And so I'm really keen to understand who you're going to have around the table and how that strategy is going to be put in place when you are chafing off the budget and cutting it down.
To be clear, we're not talking about frontline services here. What we're talking about is what we call automation of the different processes that take place. So what we really want is that as many things as possible happen as automatically as possible, and some things can happen really smoothly. So what we need to make sure is what has been happening, for example, previously, is that if somebody filled something in on our website, for example, that generated an email, and then officers had to go and do the work generated from what somebody had said that they wanted to do it on, because we didn't have the systems in place. What we're doing in terms of digital together is that we're actually putting systems in place. This has been promised for a long time. And since before you became a councillor, and since early I became a councillor, looking back on budget papers. However, we have a very experienced, very good new AD, Nathan, and we're putting those processes in place now to make sure that as much as can happen behind the scenes happens automatically with a system dealing with it and a program dealing with it without, and we're living in a digital age. Everything else we do, when we shop online, when we buy things online, when we whatever we do, when we do our banking online, everything that we do online happens automatically behind the scenes. There isn't somebody who's actually going, you fill it in and somebody's sitting there typing away doing it. It's to bring the council to that position. It's not to say, and we've said that we're not going to have the face-to-face contact for people who want to do things in person, the telephones that they can do. But the more that we can do digitally, that doesn't need officers to actually be doing it, the more that our workers can concentrate on where they need to be, which is that front actual face-to-face contact. Digital Together is not about frontline services. When it says assigning it to different services, it's assigning the processes. This is backroom stuff. This is not a co-design with members of the public, because this is happening within corporate services in the back. Okay.
There's a thing that we have digital poverty within the community, and not too long ago I was supporting a project called Digital Daughters, and it was for young women who were single parents who did not have access to any form of digital access. So they were further isolated, disenfranchised. And so I was working with the churches in Haringey to create hubs where they could go and have access, and people could teach them how to use the digital access. My concern is that, are we looking, when we do our rethink strategy, on how you're going to make sure that it's inclusive and that people can access it? Because otherwise you're going to leave a section of the community behind.
Digital exclusion is a rights issue, as I'm sure you will agree, in 2024. It's not just about interacting with the council, it's about interacting with the NHS. It's about everything. People need to have digital be included. And we are embarking this year on a digital inclusion strategy, which we will be co-designing to a certain extent with various groups, etc. It's in a genesis stage, but it's coming forward this year, and it's a very important piece of work. Digital inclusion has 3 sections. It's the knowledge, it's the equipment, and it's the actual being online of having the Wi-Fi wherever you are. So it's 3 things that we're dealing with. This is being done in councils across the country, and it's a very vital piece of work for us, because in the long run, for us, it will save us money if people can do things digitally. You know, it costs us much more to have personal contact than it does for somebody to even just to send an email. So the more people who can contact us digitally, the better. People want it. And also what we have to do is to try to look for partners, both partners like the groups that you've been working with, that we can support to roll this out, but also partners like, for example, the banks are giving out tablets because they want everyone to be able to bank online. So there are lots of partners that are willing to help us to fund this. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, because this is something that is starting to come forward, and it's very, very important work for our residents. It's, you know, not just in terms of us and our budget, But anybody who is digitally excluded now is at such a huge disadvantage. If kids at home in secondary school cannot get online, when my son was doing his A-levels, he was able to go online and look at the marking schemes for the paper he was going to be writing and see exactly what he had to do to learn at midnight. If kids at home don't have that access, they are at such a huge disadvantage. So this is something really important and something that we are taking very seriously and bringing forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. It's really refreshing to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, I've got Councillor White on this area as well.
Yes, just about the figures. Thanks. Because just to note, before I ask my questions, just to note that of the 708,000 savings slippage for this financial year, 458,000, which is about 2/3, comes from this one saving. So it is quite important in the scheme of this savings tracker. And so just to understand, I'm just asking for clarification really, just to understand what's being said in the narrative. It says, it talks about reprofiling the shortfall into next year, 24-25, 1 million, 25-26, 1.8 million. Now, we had a predicted saving of 500,000 this year, of which we're failing to make 458. Add that to the 500 that was originally proposed for next year. That actually makes slightly less than 1 million. Then this 1.36 million originally proposed for 25-26, and we're now saying 1.8 million. So are we actually saying that despite the non-achievement of this largely we failed to achieve it this year, overall it's going to save us more money than we were predicting this time last year? Have I understood that correctly?
And try and help this saving. Yeah, I mean, I understand the confusion. So my understanding to say this is a very old saving. It has been around. You've probably seen it in your meetings over the years. So it has been around. It's been rolled forward. It's always been 2.8 million is the kind of remainder that was left. So that is the total that we need to achieve. I'm not sure why it adds up to only 2.3 in the figures there. Maybe that's 2.3 plus the 500 that we were supposed to deliver. Yeah, so that's what it is. So there was supposed to be an earlier 500. So it's been hanging around and has been reprofiled, but my target is 2.8 million from digital together. What the problem that we've had is that we've delivered some bits of it. It was previously an even larger target. We have delivered some more savings from people voluntarily identifying systems and processes that were able to be automated. But the reality is that there's no real incentive for services to kind of sort of put themselves forward unless they're interested in it or can see a benefit immediately for that kind of bit of service transformation. It's because the saving has sat as a cross-cutting saving and has been held by digital services. But the money to be saved is in service departments because they're the ones with the systems and the processes and that are currently being done by people, because this is a saving. Automation means getting a system or a process or a machine to do something more quickly and efficiently and with a greater benefit for the users than if it was being done manually. So that's a tricky thing for services to put forward themselves. So what we want to do is make more of an incentive that says, we think that in your service you have got these systems and these processes that could be automated, and we also think that therefore there's a reasonable saving that you could make. So we want to give some ownership of the saving to the services who hold the budgets from which the saving was always intended to come, but they've had no incentive to engage with digital. So what we want to do is say, look, we can help you make this saving, but you need to engage with us and we need to automate these processes. So that's a bit of work that we want to do in terms of where the targets are assigned, because at the minute it's just sat in a big blob in the centre and nobody's got really any incentive to engage with it. But what we also haven't been able to do in digital, and as Councillor Collins said, we've got sort of new leadership in that service, rethinking the skills that we need in that service. We haven't had an offer to other services to say, we can help you develop and reprogram, develop the code that will enable us to do it more efficiently. We've developed that team now. We did the work that we did in Budget Fortnight, identified a lot of opportunities. So we've now got a pipeline of potential automation projects. So I think we've got more scope now, and more realistic prospect of delivering this saving than we've ever had in the past, which was sort of based on sort of goodwill, I think, and hoping that people would come forward with some suggestions. We've done the preparatory work, and so I'm more. It will still be challenging because it is a large sum of money, but I'm more confident now that we've got a prospect of realising it.
So, oh, Yvonne, so sorry. Don't worry. No. Thank you for coming tonight. Okay. So I was going to do a quick follow-up on that. Actually, that was one of the points I was going to make. Councillor White, the maths, the brain puts it very succinctly. The bit that I noted that we have had previously, but we have only made the £42,000 saving out of that substantive amount that we were hoping to save. So I'm wondering as a committee whether it is worth us putting a recommendation in, not because I think that this should be happening, but I'm just wondering if we as a committee should be asking to see how this is going to be working with the other directorates, because I think that sounds to me like where that sticking point is. And I think as a scrutiny committee, we can sort of sometimes bring that up into the light a bit more and actually put a bit more emphasis on it, because this is a significant saving, and without that I think a substantive part of this savings is obviously not going to be made, as Councillor White has pointed out. So would the committee be happy to sort of put a recommendation forward in that vein, that we ask for that information about how that is going to be working with directorates, and the challenge to the directorates about how they are going to be able to cope with this, and see what they say as well. And then I think we could see what came of that. So it's an unusual recommendation, because we would normally say, oh, we don't agree with this saving, or we think, yeah, but actually in this case, I think it's more about bringing it up to the full and finding out what exactly is, going on from the directorates. So as part of that, is there anything else on the recommendations? We've got the recommendation about Spurs, which there was unanimous agreement on. We've got the recommendation now on the main part about digital together. Was there anything else that colleagues wanted to add at this point around any of the concerns that they had previously raised, whether they wanted to put that forward into a recommendation? Whilst colleagues are thinking, I'm just going to say I had one on increased income from commercial and other events in the parks. So I know we're going back to parks, but because we've got green as the RAG delivery savings, and then we've got quite a variation in the amounts in the next few years about what amounts we're supposed to be saving. So it's from 124,000 down to 40, then up to 89,000. Down to 44, and that's an amber. So it's gone from green to an amber, which is confusing. I don't quite see. We seem to have jotted along quite happily on the 50,000, and then we've got quite a variation in the figures, and that's gone to amber. So if anyone could explain that, whilst colleagues are thinking about they want any recommendations, I'd be very grateful to anyone on the call tonight.
Happy to come in on that one, Councillor Connor, if it helps.
Thank you, Mark.
I'm not sure the 124 in column L is correct, because that is supposed to be the 23-24 saving, which is actually 50k, which has been met. So it's effectively going 50 to 40 to 89 to 44 to 44. But as I said earlier on, we've been able to achieve that saving this year. But as you may well be aware, we did run the Tough Mudder event this financial year, and that's not an event that's going to run next year in Finsbury Park. So with the removal of that, there's an additional pressure to be met in terms of trying to achieve that 40k in 24-25, and because of that and the need to step up in the following year to 89k, at the moment it's very difficult to see where we might be getting those events from that will actually generate that income. So whilst we've been comfortable for this year, next year and future years we're less confident of. Hence it's been green for this year because we've achieved it, but in future years it's amber because we've got less certainty that that's going to be met.
Okay, well, I'm just going to be quite brief because we are getting a bit late and we've got another 3 appendices to go through. So I'm like to make a recommendation that we have a bit more information around this for the meeting next week. So really just to understand the real prospect of actually making £89,000 savings, going up into 2025. I think for me, I'm just having heard what I've heard from Mark. I think to me there's a question mark around that, whether that's a viable savings that's come in, and it would be really helpful to have a bit more information to give a bit more confidence that that's a realistic ask, or whether it should be that sort of between that 40 and 50 mark. Has anyone else got anything about that recommendation I've just made, or anything else they want to add at this point? Right, then we're going to go on to the next section, which is, that was the big one. We've got the new revenue growth proposals, and this is Appendix 4. So you've got the area, which has got these slightly strange acronyms next to it. And then we've got the funding, sort of the new revenue growth. So how much extra we're going to be adding in. So Francis, do you want to just explain what this appendix is actually trying to sort of tell us by the end of it, and which ones are repeating and which ones are they all one-offs?
Yeah, so this is a list of growth that's being proposed to be put forward into next year, and it's all continuing. So all of these items go in 24-25 and continue until we revisit them in the future. But they're broadly addressing base budget pressures. Certainly, I can just run down in column C, where it's titled area, just to confirm what those acronyms are. So L&G is legal and governance. Corp is the corporate areas. ERE is environment, resident experience. And CSE is culture, strategy and engagement. Quite a number of these areas, if you look at the descriptions, you'll see back to the when we were looking at the Q2 position right at the beginning of the meeting, and we looked at some of the in-year overspends. And I think at the time I mentioned that we were not ignoring where there were overspends, where there were genuine sort of pressures that we felt they were going to continue. For example, the very first one about the coroner's court, we spoke about that at the beginning, and we said we'd recognise that and built in growth. So quite a number of these we've sort of already addressed earlier on in the meeting. We're just now picking up and putting them in here. So I hope that's a helpful introduction.
No, that is, thank you. And I have to say, I like the way that we put some growth into support for the committee teams and scrutiny committees. I'm just going to put forward that straight out there. So positive prejudice in that respect. So is there anything that members particularly wanted to pick up here around the money that's being added into these areas? Councillor Warren.
Thanks. My first question, just on the additional scrutiny officer, which I think would be very welcome. I wanted to check, is that actually adding a new role? That's not, because I believe there is a vacancy in the team at the moment. So that is actually, rather than filling the vacancy, that's adding a new role. Can I ask a couple more, or shall I? There's, oh, I've lost it now. There's a proposal around, is there a proposal around fleet spending here? Oh, yeah. Um,
To last.
yeah. So, I mean, does this relate to what we were just discussing previously? On the fleet undelivered saving. So yeah, if you could just kind of clarify what's going on with that. So we had some time limited funding. We've not managed to spend it now. We're having to put some of our own money in. What went wrong there? Yeah, just those two. Thanks.
I think Fiona's going to just come in and address the first question.
Thank you, Chair. Fiona Alderman, I'm Head of Legal and Governance. So there is a part-funded position in the scrutiny team, so the growth bid will enable that to become a full-time position. Thank you.
I can answer the second one, Chair.
So the second, yeah, is that Councillor Chandwani? Yeah.
It is. So my understanding isn't it isn't time limited money that we had and we haven't spent it. And I can see from the description that's how it might have come across. So basically, in the Veolia contract, they were responsible for some of the fleet maintenance and management, and that part of their contract expires this next financial year. So it's now a cost that we need to absorb. No one can tell me why 15 years ago it didn't have the same lifespan as the whole contract. And nobody can tell any of the staff because the staff weren't here 15 years ago. But it is what it is. Veolia after March the 31st do not need to cover that fleet part of the contract, and so it's £100,000 that we now need to find. So it's a growth bid for us to ask for an extra £100,000 from to put in the base budget to cover that cost of the fleet.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just look to see if anyone else wants to ask it. Yeah, Councillor White.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just on the which line is it? The leisure management service growth. Referring back to what we discussed earlier in the papers on page 52, it talks about £1 million, which we discussed. On page 54, it talks about £0.9 million, and here we've got 946,000. Could we just confirm that all of these three places are talking about the same figure? Just rounding up and down in each.
Yeah, confirmation.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask a slightly just a more general question around the finances. So we've got new revenue growth, so that's money going in just over 3.3 million into 24-25. So for the following year, there's nothing extra or sort of, is this sort of something that will be going forward under each of these directorates, or is this like, well, this is what we're able to sort of say we're definitely doing at the moment, and then we're going to come up with different figures the following year? So I've got Francis, and then I've got Councillor.
A really quick one. It's basically these are all put in and they're assumed to be ongoing. So if we assume they were coming out, we'd have a minus the following year. So this is all assumed to be required as an ongoing budget.
So Carlin, did you want to add anything to that? No, that's fine. Okay. So we've got an extra 3.3 million coming in every year. When we're sitting here in the following year, where there'll be new revenue growth proposals, this will just be there and then built into the base budget, won't it? So this will just be seen as, because we know our base budget is going up.
Where we are at the moment is that we're sitting this year with a substantial overspend. And obviously an overspend has to be cleared by the end of the year. We have to balance. And so what is prudent is that we look at where we're spending extra money and where we're going to have to spend extra money, and we put that into our budget. We do, hopefully once we put that into the budget, that's going to be enough. We can't really predict that fully at the moment, but this is the best estimate that we have. If we thought that on these items it was going to cost us more in future years, then obviously those would come in future years as additional figures. So, you know, we'd be putting in, for example, the coroner's court, 166,000 this year, and next year we would, for 25-26, we'd put in an additional 20,000 or whatever it would show in the MTFS. This is the best forecast at the moment of these figures based on where we are at the moment that officers have. So that's why it looks like that. We can't, a budget is all about forecasting and estimating and looking at what our spend is now and what we think our spend is going to be. But it's important that we cover everything that we know is going to, where we're predicting an overspend, where we're predicting that we're going to need the spend next year, or where we're seeing the overspend this year. We put it into next year's budget so that we have catered for it within the budget. So we know that that money's coming, so we don't run it as an overspend in the budget next year. So
Yeah, that's thank you. That's really helpful. So the last bit, which is the various costs on the national big switch off, the audio visual equipment. So I'm assuming that each of these particular areas that you've identified will have different financial costs of great accounted for that. And I'm also assuming that the national big switch off, I'm assuming, will have a limited a number of years over which that cost would occur. Are you then sort of giving that as a figure because you think that Microsoft cybersecurity may increase? Is that your best estimate at the moment? And therefore you could, you know, one of these could fall away, but you could give a little bit more within that.
Yeah, I think these are all best estimates of the impact of those. And I think the big switch off is an ongoing thing, unfortunately. Whatever it's I'm not a technical person, but it will have an ongoing impact. I think it's just additional cost for us.
Yeah, the big switch off is the replacement of analog phone lines with other kinds of digital phone lines. I'm not a technical person either, but that's what it is. But we're having to replace, you know, it affects things like, I mean, there are obviously phone lines across the council that we're identifying that were analog, the ones that haven't been converted to data based ones, but it's also things like how will we manage the emergency arrangements in our lifts, in some of our sheltered accommodations. So as Francis says, there are ongoing, we have to find alternatives that were previously, all of these sort of, I suppose, kind of quite self-contained systems have sort of remained analog, even though quite a lot of all the rest of our phone lines have been modernized. These remained, and they now need to be replaced with something different. So
thank you.
It's a national thing that we should have new burdens funding for.
We should, yes, indeed. Okay, so are there any recommendations on the new revenue growth proposals? Other than the one we're getting clarification on the leisure management service costings. Is there anything else? Any further information anybody wants? Recommendations? No. Okay. I'm just checking online. I've not got Lords coming. Okay. Right. So we're moving on then to Appendix 5, the new revenue savings proposals. So this is on. Wait. Page 129 in your main pack, and that's a capital one. No. 127. Apologies, 127. Too many things in front of me. Okay, so Councillor Worrell, straight in.
Sorry. I think this relates to what I was asking about earlier, Jess, on the sort of maximising our income from digital advertising. I just wanted a bit of clarity on sort of how the different spends and saves are being recorded here, because we've got that we would spend 35k presumably on recruiting a new staff member, and then the following year that we would save 35k, but then I presume elsewhere there's sort of like additional, the income that they would be bringing in is captured. So are we saying that in 25, 26, they would only be bringing in enough income to cancel out the amount that was made to employ them? And then, yeah, I'm just a bit confused about where this all sits.
No, I appreciate it. It's not simple. So it's the cost is a half year cost because we would anticipate appointing them halfway through the year. And that's partly because some of the work that we want to do is looking at all of our assets and where there might be some that would be, as I said earlier, appropriate to have advertising screens put on in different forms. And so we are dependent on the work that the corporate landlord are doing to review all of our assets. And so that information will be available partway through the year. So it's a part cost in the first year, and then in the subsequent year that the cost of the post is offset and includes a saving. So it's a 1 year post that will sort of do that investigative work and look at where the sites are, and then cover the costs with a saving, and so that there will be a the saving of I can't remember the total saving. I think is something like 70 to 100, I think, but what we're doing is offsetting the cost of the post for a further half year. So see what I mean? And there are elsewhere in the final budget, there will be further proposals around just our whole approach to commercial income and generating, because it's a bit bitty at the moment, but there's a proposal to look at our income generation across the piece. But that's what that is. That's why it's slightly mixed, because it's a cost of a post that goes across 2 financial years and then starts to deliver savings in the second year.
So am I understanding this right? Adding this staff resource will result in whatever the savings are that we've said, plus 70k? Yeah? Okay.
Councillor Simmons-Sappho.
Hi, I'm curious to understand about the enhanced enforcement for environment crime, fly tipping and littering, and why it's 100 minus, because N15, my whole casework in N15, the emails are pregnant with the fly tipping, settees being dumped there. What does this mean? 100 minus 100. Does that mean that there's a deficit of 100,000, and then when you get to 2028, it's still the same figure? Can you explain that one to me, please?
Who'd like to come in on that one? Anyone on flight?
I think maybe Mark would come in on that one.
Can I just
No, not Mark.
answer that? I can answer
Councillor Chandwani.
the second part of the question. It doesn't fall under Mark. But can Francis or John just answer the format of the question? So the format is,
Sure.
what does minus mean?
Sure. Okay, I'll pick that one up first then. So when we show the savings as minus, because we're assuming it's either additional income or it's a reduction in spend. So this proposal, I believe, is around issuing more fixed penalty notices, which will generate income. So where people are fly tipping, and there we have enforcement officers and issue fixed penalty notices that will generate additional income of 100k.
Well, we're not finding them. We're not finding the people. We have settees on the street. Just when I left to come up here off West Green Road, there's a settee, a whole 3-piece settee just left out on the road. Yeah, you walk past the borough, it's all over the place.
So Michelle,
we need
can I just make sure that we've got the question right, because it's a budget scrutiny. So the first question was, what does the minus mean? So the minus is the amount of income that we're going to be expecting from fining people. The second question about how many people we're fining. So when I looked at the data earlier on today, we've fined 1,600 and something people already, and for the last 3 quarters of this current financial year, and we're taking between 7 and 10 people to court every month, and getting success there. Do I think that we have a fly tipping problem? Yes, because that's evidenced by DEFRA, and it's increasing by vast percentages across the country, and it has done for the last 10 years. I think what we're trying to do here is we're saying that we're going to go with bringing in a private company. We don't know which one yet, but there are private companies that do this. So the proposal here is to go to a private company so that we have an extra resource of people that can go out and find people for low-level fly tipping and littering, and then the current staff that we have can concentrate on some of the bigger and more kind of complex situations. What we have now is we have a team of 2 ASB officers and 6 litter and fly tipping enforcement who are trying to do everything. And some of these cases can be really complex because they involve planning enforcement, they involve, there's always a story behind the bin, and the story behind the bin could be everything from human slavery to overcrowding to loads of things that they're finding. So we're trying to bring in an extra team. The team will be charging us on a commission basis, so it won't cost us anything as a council as an initial outlay. And then the fines are split, I believe. The kind of current industry is between 35% to the company and 65% to the council, and then there's other companies that do 60-40, 50-50. So all of that will be kind of pulled out in the procurement. And so we're assuming that if we were to fine people with this new team, we would see an extra growth of £100,000 of income to the council from the fining, based on the percentages depending on what company we go for. So it's totally taking on board your point about fly tipping. It's totally recognising we don't have the money to employ a team of another 6 or 10 people, but to go out to the private sector and work on a commission basis is a way that it doesn't need us to put in an outlay, but we will get some income back from it.
Is there any income assigned to deterring people from fly tipping? Any deterrence, any advertisement, any front facing to prevent it from happening in the beginning? Because
so to
yes,
be honest
you might,
with you, Michelle, and I'm more than happy also to have this conversation in more depth in your scrutiny panel. I don't know how much deterrent you need to say to adults to use a bin. If I'm honest, I mean, there's primary school kids that understand
it's
that.
not just the bin. It's not just the bin. It is settees. It is bulk waste that's just left on the streets.
In our data, 83% of our fly tipping is actually household binned waste, and people need to learn how to use a bin. In terms of our deterrent, fining people is a deterrent. We have CCTV cameras that acts as a deterrent. We have education that tells people don't fly tip here in 5 different languages, that there's posters that can go up. We have banners, we have social media campaigns, but ultimately the best way, it's a crime. And the best thing that we need to do is of course we can educate people that they need to dispose of their rubbish more effectively. But the best thing we can do is to make sure that people who commit that crime get served a punishment. And then we do that by fining people, which is what this proposal is about. I'm more than happy to have a kind of more in-depth conversation about fly tipping. I think something I've always wanted to talk about, really. But in terms of the budget proposal, which is what we're here to discuss today, the budget is saying that we will have £100,000 extra income, and that's how we're going to do it, by going out to the private sector and getting them to come in to enhance our current resource.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. So just to follow up on Councillor Simmons-Safo's question, So the saving that's predicted here, has the work been done to confirm that by going out to the private sector, the saving that's produced is going to be greater than it would be if we were to employ more staff ourselves to issue fixed penalty notices and etc. And if the answer is yes, and the saving is greater, it would be great to know what the saving would be if we were to do this in-house. And also, I think I would like to be reassured that that saving isn't generated, that larger saving, the larger amount of saving isn't generated by the people who are actually doing the work being paid less money or getting worse terms and conditions than they would get if they were being employed by the council.
Okay, so there's quite a lot to unpick there. Firstly, if we were to employ a team of 10 people, then from day one, from hour one, we would have to pay their salary. If we were to go to a private company, we don't pay anybody's salary. They get their payment on a commission basis. So it's either a 60-40, 35-65. If they fine one person for the whole year, we've lost no money, but we make between 50 and 60% of what they earned from that fine. So that's the why it's cheaper. It's cheaper from day one because there's no initial outlay for us to do. If they do what we believe they're doing from estimates from other boroughs that use private companies, then we're looking at a monthly figure of, you know, a few thousand, a few hundred fines a month, a few thousand a year, and then our percentage cut of that will give us 100,000. It's not a saving, it is a income. So it's an income generation. We'll make profit, 100% profit from day one because we don't pay anything. In terms of the procurement, it will be part of our procurement policy to make sure that people are paid the right wage. Would they be paid more if they were with us? I think that we would have a bigger outlay because we would have to pay their pension and national insurance contributions. But we would have to pay somebody to work for us, regardless of how much they make. They might not find anybody for 2 weeks. So this is more of a kind of commission pay by fine sort of environment. It's not replacing our current in-house team, it's enhancing our current in-house team. So we're not making any savings, nobody's losing their jobs. We're just making sure that our current in-house team are focusing on more of the complex cases and more of the kind of low level business waste and littering and low level fly tipping is being dealt by a team that will come into our borough, and whatever they make, we get a percentage of.
Thanks for that. Could I just ask then if it's possible for us to be provided with information, if it's available, on what the comparable saving would be if, rather than going out to the private sector, we were to deliver this increased enforcement by expanding our in-house team? Just if that information is available.
That'd be absolutely really easy to do.
Okay, I've got one slight issue around this that Councillor Simonsetto has raised. My one, when I go around with officers to do the street, you know, and waste, and I understand there's two different teams, one to do the road sweeping and one to do the, you know, Viola for the bins. The issues that I have are around houses of multiple occupancy, where you've got the bins that, especially over the Christmas period or any other festive period, you know, they become overflowing, and then it becomes, and I stand there with officers and they say to me, what we really need is a joined up approach between the street cleaners and the Veolia who empty the bins, and to sort of let each other know what's happening. And, you know, they put on if the bins are looking like they're getting full. So the issue that I have is that Veolia often says that they can't provide more bins to that area. Now, if you've got a family, you know, we know that there are families sort of living in difficult conditions. There's a lot of people in the houses. I'm worried that we're going to, if you're a contract person and you know that you're going to get paid if you find somebody, you are really going to be looking to get those, you know, those fly tipping things slapped on fines. So are we at risk of sort of penalising people who are in those sort of situations where Veolia can't provide more bins for whatever reason? I'm never quite sure why, but that doesn't seem to happen. And then rubbish gets dumped next to their big bins, and they could then end up with the penalty fines. That's actually other people might have just dropped rubbish next to it. So I'm just wondering how we in that contract, how we ensure that we're not actually ending up fining people who are really on that absolute breadline, and actually, you know, and ensuring that that's in place. I'm sure you've already thought of it, but it'd just be helpful to understand that.
I think there's a few things there. So firstly, if they're a HMO, then the selective licensing scheme should be making sure that that property has the adequate capacity for the bins. So you could have two terrace houses next to each other. One is segmented into being a 6 dwelling, 9 people HMO, and one's got a 3 nuclear families next to it. The nuclear family will be entitled to 1 black bin, 1 green bin, 1 food waste bin, but the HMO is entitled to more because they've got more people in there. So a part of the selective licensing scheme should be saying to the landlord, actually, because of the amount of people you've got in there, you're allowed 2 black bins, 3 recycling bins, 2 waste bins, etc. So if that's one of the kind of tools to make sure that's happening in a kind of houses of multiple occupation. In terms of somebody having a lot of side waste and their bins are overflowing, if it's contained within their garden, they haven't actually broken any law, so they can't be fined for it. But if they're now taking their waste and dumping it on the public highway, they've committed a crime. And whether they're on the breadline or not, there is no real kind of excuse of taking your waste and putting it on the public highway. But if they're putting it in their front garden or by their bin, then it's considered a side waste. I think you're right there that there is a whole load of joined up approach, which is one of the reasons why we're looking at the Veolia contract and why we've asked for an extension, because you do have people that are kind of working on a very task orientated way when you outsource. In terms of making sure that there is a robust kind of process to make sure that the contractor is not going for low hanging fruit and just kind of working on that basis. There isn't a challenge process. In the law, there isn't an appeals process, but we've introduced it based on the feedback that we've got that people can challenge. And we've now got a new online form which they can do that, and therefore that will be in-house, and that will be done by the head of service, who would actually say, no, I think that this fine is disproportionate, and then be able to revoke it. That happens now, though, as well. That happens now with our current in-house staff, that we do have a level of oversight on each and every fine that can be challenged. So I guess it's a risk, but it isn't a risk that doesn't have mitigation to it. But you can't be fined unless you've broken the law. And so I guess we need to make sure that there's no real kind of excuse for anyone to break the law. And if people are living in houses of multiple occupation and they haven't got bin capacity, it's something they need to raise with their landlord, and through the selective licensing situation, we'll be able to raise it with them as well. So I'm not going to say here on live on camera, where it's going to be recorded and always be here, that those situations will never happen. Of course, there's always that risk, but I think that risk will also exist if it was in-house.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Simon Sappho like to come back in.
I'm sorry to keep talking to you about the waste, but the one thing that I'm curious to understand is the new commissioners that you said that we're going to commission them, so they will be working. It's almost like 0 contract hours, isn't it? Because you don't. It's almost like, because they are not going to get paid, or they're not going to get a revenue unless they do a task. Is that correct?
So the company doesn't get paid. It doesn't mean they don't pay their staff.
The company doesn't get paid.
No, so their business.
So in effect,
they would prefer.
That's their business model.
Their business model. Most people's business model in this field is they prefer to take a cut of the fine. So if the fine is £400, they prefer to take £200 because they know that they're going to make more money like that than be paid a basic rate. But they do pay their staff, but they end up taking 50% of a fine. So they prefer that business model. So the staff get paid, but the company will get paid on payment of results.
Okay, I just wanted to ask, is it so much more expensive to bring it in-house than it is to have it as it is now?
So I've
The figures
agreed,
that you've done.
one of the recommendations from Councillor White is that we will give you the figures, but to put it in a really basic term, if we go with this model of outsourcing it, it costs us nothing. And if we go with the model of having to hire a team of 10 staff, it's probably going to cost us in the region of £200,000 to £300,000 because the staff need to be paid. So this model is costing us nothing. We don't have £200,000 to £300,000. But I'm going to give you the proper figures. But if we employ somebody, we've got to pay them.
I wish we did have £200,000 to £300,000. I wish we did have it, because for me it just feels more ethical to have it in-house and for our staff to be doing it. Although I can understand the rationale between why we are going with this model, because it
Michelle,
doesn't
if you want to
cost.
put it down as a strong recommendation that finance give us an extra, maybe £200,000 to £300,000 was a bit less, maybe about 500,000, then I'm more than happy for you to do that. But there is no money to do that. So we've got a problem that
Okay.
residents and councillors really want us to deal with, which is fly tipping, and we're trying to increase the resource to do it. And this is a method that a lot of councils are doing that we need to explore.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I think we've sort of gone round and lots of explored different areas. So we've got recommendation from Councillor White about the looking at the insourcing and sort of the outsourcing, basically, I think the model and the costs associated with that. I think I would like to ask about the oversight, and I know you've mentioned it, Councillor Chandwani, but just could you provide reassurance back to this committee that for next week that the how they're going to be measured. So if they're getting £10,000, but actually you've worked out that actually they really have just gone around HMOs and just sort of done a low, the low hanging fruit, as you said, about putting on those fines, that we have some way of challenging that, because it's about that joined up approach, isn't it? That should be fed back, because we don't have selective licensing in the West at the moment. I know there's a push to do it, but I won't do it now, but there's I can tell you where this is happening in my ward. So I think actually it's just really about that joined up approach with the people who are, being fined, and just making sure that actually we are targeting not the people that just happen to have to have their bins out on the road, because that's in those little enclave bits that are set back, and people dump rubbish next to them, and it's not those people that are going to get fined. So that's all I'm going to sort of suggest at this point. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add into that. No. Okay. Very quickly, Councillor Carlin.
Just very briefly with
very
my,
briefly.
with my previous hat on.
Okay.
Selective landlord licensing is very specific and very really, it isn't granted for a whole borough, and you have to have the evidence. And the reason that it's not across the whole borough is because there just wasn't the evidence in the West. So just to clarify that, it's not because we wouldn't.
No, I didn't mean to suggest that at all. But I know that it came in first in the East, and I know that there is a push to get it across the whole borough. You can't do it.
Generally you can't get it across the whole borough. That's not what the government, that's why it's selective. You have to show it ward by ward, the need within that ward. And even Hornsey, which does have a problem, and Stroud Green, it would have diluted it, because although there is some really poor housing, rental housing, there's also some really good private rented accommodation in both wards. The reason that it was drawn where it was, and very unusually actually was granted by the department without any amendments, that's almost unheard of, was because the evidence base was so strong for doing it on the east of the railway line. But that's the reason we're not going to get it.
You're not
in the
going
list.
to, okay, well, there's,
We could, but it's not that.
okay.
We,
Thank you,
we
Councillor
wouldn't get it.
Colin. Apologies, because there's one other area on this bit that I just wanted to ask about. It's the New River Sports Centre with the operational subsidy of 170,000. I noticed there that you're looking to the new revenue savings of 53,000. I am concerned about this because in the bit underneath it, it says by reviewing concessionary discounts. I know there's other things about reducing usage through technological improvements. I'm not sure what that is, but the big bit that I'm actually concerned about is what do we mean when we say we're reducing concessionary discounts? Thank you.
So, Chair, I did refer to this earlier on when I was talking about New River, when we were talking about the 70k, I think it was, associated with fusion concessions. In terms of the 170k overall, I did say that 40k of that was identified as being from electricity stroke energy reduction. Around about 100k we predict will come in from new income streams by increasing the activities on the New River site, allowing different types of events to go on. So there's only about 30k left, which we think will come through from revised fees and charges. The reference to reviewing the concessionary discounts is because that they have not been looked at for 15 years. So we've not actually factored any savings in out of that 170k at the moment based upon those changes, any changes whatsoever to the concessionary discounts. It may just be something that we do actually take forward because there might be a valid reason for doing so. But at this point in time, 170k is not considering that.
Okay, so I think I heard, sorry, that I'm not sure if it was me or the sound, but are you saying then you haven't reviewed the concessionary discounts for a large amount of time and now you're going to be doing it?
Correct. They've just not been done for 15 years. But as I said,
okay,
of that 170k, that's not related really to those concessionary discounts. We've identified the 170k from other sources, the ones that identified down there, the energy reductions, new income streams, and from looking at the fees and charges rather than actually focusing in on concessionary reductions or changes. That's because we just need to look at those just to make sure that we are applying a consistent approach across all of our leisure centres in the longer term.
right, but the £53,000 that you have got as the savings proposal, so not the 170, obviously that's
there.
Yeah, oh sorry. So what's the concessionary, why is the concessionary discounts in this bit if this isn't actually part of the saving at all? Sorry, I'm just trying to work out why
I can
this is in
appreciate
there.
that. I think it was the late edition, Chair, in terms of the commentary. But having checked this with Simon Farrow before we went off on leave this week, he did clarify that it was because the concessionary discounts have not been reviewed for 15 years. We feel as though there is something to be done in that space, because there might be some scope to do that in terms of making some changes to some of the concessionary discounts rather than actually looking at making an adjustment on the fees and charges. But that only equates to about 30,000 out of the total of 170. The bulk of the savings actually comes from, as I said, the energy reduction issues and also looking at new income streams, because we have been able to generate a lot more income than we thought from actually taking New River in-house and actually delivering services in a very different way there than were being delivered by Fusion in the past. So we think that we can build on that in future years and therefore achieve that 170k without necessarily having to rely upon any significant income coming through from those review of concessionary discounts.
Right. Okay. So very briefly, so I'm just going to remove that reviewing concession. That's nothing to do with the savings.
That's easiest. Yeah.
Just be really clear. Excellent. Okay. So I need to say, because we're getting close to 10 o'clock, we're going to probably ask people to be a little bit more succinct. That's probably including myself, but we're all going to sort of, be a little bit. But if we do go over 10 o'clock, can I just ask the panel to agree that we can, suspend
And signing orders,
Standing
yeah, you
orders,
can only
that's the
proceed with the current item that we're on, which means, yeah, but that's the main item anyway, so yeah.
We've only got one more appendix left to do.
Let's just
Yeah.
get it out
Yeah.
in 10 minutes.
Okay, right. Okay. Going to check with you that there's no recommendations that you want to put forward for Appendix 5 other than the ones we've already discussed. No, excellent. Right, moving on to Appendix 6. This is the draft capital programme. So just going to see hands up for questions on the draft capital programme. So the top, yeah, Councillor White, just to say that, oh, Councillor Worrell, the top bit is existing in, and then in underneath is all the new, or all the new ones. Councillor Worrell.
Thanks. Mine was just a question. Well, firstly, to clarify, so we've got on the corporate laptop increase growth, 400,000 existing, and then oh no, they're slightly different things, right? So one's actually just for physically new laptops, one before. Wait, are they the same or are they different? Sorry, the wording's a bit different. Sorry. So on the existing capital bids, it's the one at the bottom, corporate laptop refresh, 400K. But then on the new bid, there's also laptop replacement for 500K. So are they the same? Are they added together, or is it? Yeah.
It's an additional assessment of what we need to fund, so it's on an ongoing thing. I think the issue has been that we've bought laptops at particular times, so they then run out. So we do need to keep an ongoing requirement to refresh the laptop estate. I think, as I mentioned earlier, we're always trying to find the most cost-effective way of doing it, but it is just an ongoing cost of working. What I asked our office to do, because we have, I did do a cabinet signing on this, is for us to examine across the organisation what how sophisticated a laptop has to be at different levels within the organisation. So if we've got members of staff who literally are just doing emails and really basic stuff on their laptops, then they could probably do with a lower spec. And then when we've got people who need highest, at different levels, not just two, so that we make sure to reduce the cost, and so that we make sure that we're being as cost efficient as possible. The other things that we're looking at is we're going to be, which we haven't been, interestingly, logging every single laptop with a number against somebody who takes one. So especially like when we get agency staff that come in, to make sure that we get those laptops back. And another thing is that Nathan has been trying out at the moment, everyone's got these Lenovo's. We're trying out another laptop that's slightly smaller, slightly lighter, but also really good, to see whether we swap over to that, and that will also be much cheaper. So we are really looking at everything that we can do to reduce the cost. But as laptops reach end of life, then we are going to have to replace them. And it's a rolling program, which is why it's money. So this one's relatively new. I'm not going to need a new laptop for years. So it's not like everybody's laptop is going to be renewed, but this is a rolling program, and this is an estimate of how much we think it's going to cost each year.
So just for my interpretation of these two tables, has the capital bid increased by 100,000, or has it increased by 500,000 for this year?
Oh, sorry, it's by 500K. So a year. So it's a new estimate of what we think we're going to have to spend. Again, taking into account the size of the organisation and looking at the laptop estate that we've got, and when we think it will need replacing.
Sorry to push this because I know it's so late. So were we really quite off then when we previously estimated what we would need to get?
I mean, I think it's a combination of the organisation growing, more staff, and the costs of supplying the laptops increasing. So yeah, the cost of a laptop has gone up because of the contract inflation I referred to earlier. So it is a big increase, but it's a combination of factors that's driving that.
I'm going to whiz through a couple of capital concerns that I had on this proposal. So I've got 401 Tottenham Hale Green Spaces. My understanding is there's an enormous amount of new builds, tower blocks, because I sat on some of the planning for it. And I don't know where the section 106 money has gone, because it says here mixed funded scheme. So obviously there's section 106 there, but to fund the programme of green space improvement, there's been so many new developments on that. Surely we have got enough section 106 money. So I would really like to understand, and I can have this for next week, so I don't need it now. But how much extra money we're going to be funding as Haringey Council compared to how much section 106 money there is in the pot for improving green spaces. The second one is on 457, Future High Street Project, the Gourley Triangle development. So again, I'm at a bit of a loss to understand why we haven't got more money coming in from the developers to cover the cost. I think we've got 4 million against this one. I'm just going to check 457. Yeah, sorry, thanks. Yeah, so just over £4 million. So again, it's a mixed funded scheme, but with Haringey borrowing in that. So I'd really like to understand how much Haringey is having to borrow and how much we should be getting through the section 106 for improving that infrastructure that's for that development. So that's the second one, and the third one is the 336 New River Centre self-financing strategy at 1.6 million. So what are these different projects, improvement projects, and how actually are we going to be able to self-finance those? Section
what scheme was that on?
336, the New River Centre. So I don't need the information now. I'm happy to take it for the meeting next week. But I would like to unpick those three particular projects in a little bit more detail to understand why Haringey's financing this and how much it is financing it and how much money we should be getting or that we have got in under the section 106, especially around Tottenham Hale. Thanks.
Okay, happy to do that. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Can I just briefly, I think I probably know what the answer is going to be on this, but just given the large amount of Haringey borrowing funded capital projects that amounts to nearly £20 million here when you add together the new bids and the existing schemes, and given the large amount of revenue implications that has, and the £16 million revenue gaps that we still need to are we still looking at the capital programme, and are any of these projects listed here therefore under risk of being removed from the capital programme when we come to the actual budget in March?
Okay, I think I refer you back to the report on the 5th of December that highlighted the gap and said that there will be ongoing work to close that gap in order to get us to a balanced budget, and that everything, including the capital programme, will be included in that review and that work. So the fruits of that will be made available in the February report. So.
Okay, so wait and see.
Okay, and I think that was an excellent question to finish that part of the Appendix 6 on, unless there's any other questions that other members want to ask? Lords, I'm just checking. Any other questions for this? Any other recommendations other than the ones that I've put forward on those 3 areas for more information? And then, no. Okay, right. Okay, well, thank you very much. I think we've done it justice tonight. There's been an awful lot that we've gone through. So I'm going to hand back over to Councillor White now, but that's the conclusion part of the budget part of the meeting.
Thanks. I'm pretty much just going to close the meeting. I mean, we've got no new items of urgent business under item 9. I think we can just note the work programme. Dominic, have you got anything to say?
Yeah, just a reminder to everyone, there's a Teams meeting on Thursday evening to discuss the next scrutiny review.
Great. Oh, thanks for that. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, one last thing. I am going to make a recommendation, but it will be next week around the formatting of the paper, especially for this area in particular. We had an awful lot of cabinet members that had, well, very kindly came tonight, and there were more that we could have had. And I think actually just to try and work out the financing in the tables, it's really difficult to understand for scrutiny perspective, and probably difficult for cabinet to be coming here and there for different parts of the meeting. So I think if we could look to how we simplify that. I know scrutiny officers are going to, but we'll put forward something for next week, if that's okay, if we can think about recommendation around the papers. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that. Yep, and we'll just note the future meetings, and thank you so much for chairing so ably tonight, Councillor Connor. Thank you very much to cabinet members and officers for coming this evening. Thanks for staying all the way till 10 o'clock. We're finishing now at like 2 minutes past 10. So, 10 o'clock exactly. Okay, so we're not done too badly. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Good evening.